Oh, for the land exchange, not, yeah,
Okay, committee will come back to order, and we have a little bit more public testimony. Mr. McGagna has patiently waited till after lunch. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually appreciated the time. It gave me the opportunity to prepare better for my 30-minute presentation that I'll do in 3. But I do appreciate the opportunity to be here. Jim McGagna with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. And I will focus on state lands as it relates to our grazing and agricultural lessees specifically. But it's been interesting to me that in my over 20 years in this position, I only occasionally had to deal with the state land issue. And within the last couple of years, I've had a list of them of 8 to 10 at times on my schedule that people are seeking assistance on. And I want to be quick to point out that that's not to point a finger at the state land office or anything. I think it's part of it is times are changing, and that makes it a little different. I do think that in part, one of the things that worries me is, and I'm certainly a total defender of the emphasis needs to be on the beneficiaries and optimizing revenue. And we worked very hard with this committee 10, 12 years ago to get away from the idea of maximizing, which means the biggest dollar today, and focus on optimizing, which means what's best over a period of time for the beneficiaries of this state land trust. But along with that, I think there's often, both in regulation and in implementation, a lack of recognition that for a grazing lessee, for example, this isn't just a 10-year lease for most, that it's here for 10 years, and if it's gone next time, it's something else. These state lands, for better or worse, have become an integral part of many ranching operations across the state. And many operations are no longer viable if they were to lose their state leases. They're so dependent on them. So while we meet the obligations of the trust, I think we need to do it with more sensitivity to how can we meet those obligations, and at the same time respect and honor the role that state lands have come over time to develop in our agricultural industry in this state. And I think that means we need to have rules and regulations that are clear, but provide flexibility for some common sense things. And I think we've lost that over time, not just all at once, but over time. So we're certainly committed to working with the State Land Office, and they're currently, as the director and deputy director mentioned, revising their Chapter 5 regulations. I think some of our concerns can be addressed in there, but there may be others that, in fact, we will be coming back to this committee at your next meeting and saying, we think we need a little more assistance on these. There's some that go beyond what we can deal with in the regulatory stance. But we really believe that we can honor the role of state lands and at the same time recognize the role that has evolved for them for our ranchers. And a ranch who's had a state lease for 80 years or more, and there are numerous of those around the state, and suddenly finds out because they were a week late submitting a renewal notice that now their state lease is going to be put up for as vacant land for competitive bids. There's something wrong with that. And we need to look at the process and see how we can adjust some of those things to work in today's climate, utilize technology that's available to us today. We went through something very similar to this 5 or 6 years ago with brand renewals with the Wyoming Livestock Board, and we were able to come up with some regulatory changes that recognize the realities of doing business in today's world. And I think I'm confident we can do the same thing here by working together. But we will need your help on some of these, I'm certain. Just in closing, as an example of something, under Wyoming's trespass laws, if I trespass on your land, Mr. Chairman, and if I had prior notice or it was posted, I can be subject to up to 30 days imprisonment and a $750 fine. Under a current provision in Wyoming statute, if I trespass grazing on the piece of state trust land, there is a mandatory minimum 30-day jail sentence. I don't think the state land office is necessarily enforcing that right now, but I bring that only as an example of the need to look at our statutes and see, are they meeting our needs today, both from the perspective of the beneficiaries of the trust and the perspective of an industry that's heavily dependent on those trust lands for continuing the viability of our ag operations. With that, Mr. Chairman, this is just an entree to what I believe we're going to be working with you on, and I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Committee questions? Okay. Other testimony?
Thank you.
Oh, Pete.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Pete Obermuehl with the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee today. Wanted to cover a couple of items based on the discussion I heard this morning, which quite frankly I found stunning and in some cases very disappointing. Let me just start with the issue of state royalties. The discussion was had and the slide was put up, putting state royalties in comparison with other states. And of course, that slide in and of itself is speaks for itself. We are low on the state royalty side. Mr. Crowder mentioned this, but I think that it bears repeating and some details need to be added to it. If revenue for Wyoming's children and K through 12 schools were entirely based on state land royalties, we would have a problem and we would need to discuss the royalty rate increase. But I would ask you, as a committee representing the entire state, that you take a more holistic view. Severance tax was mentioned, yes, but severance tax is not primarily what goes to fund K through 12. Property taxes. Property tax, minerals pays 100% of its value in property tax. Industrial 11.5, residential 9.5, Mr. Chairman. In 2020, one of the worst years in memory for oil and gas, paid $467 million in property tax. $336 million of that, or about 72%, went to schools, plus $130 million in federal mineral royalties, plus $76 million in state royalties, for a total of $542 million in 1 year to K through 12 education. Let me put that in a little bit more context. Mr. Chairman, one project, the Pinedale Anticline, over 15 years. The property tax generated from the Pinedale Anticline over 15 years paid for over 12,000 students in Wyoming to go through K through 12 education during that time. Over the same time frame, if you took what the average family pays for property tax on residential, doubled it, and they paid that amount for that same 15 years, they would have paid for one student to go through K through 7th grade. Mr. Chairman, I have 3 children. My property tax will not pay for one of my daughters to go all the way through K through 12. You know who pays for it? Oil and gas. Mr. Chairman, every study that this body has commissioned has shown that Wyoming is not friendly when it comes to the tax and royalty rate on oil and gas. We are more than double Colorado. And Colorado is not friendly to our industry, as you know. We're almost triple New Mexico. And the majority of that, the vast majority of it, goes to K through 12. So to Representative Heiner's point that we are underselling our resources, we are not underselling our resources. We've chosen to oversell it via other tax sources, not related to state royalties. We are, if not the most expensive, one of the most expensive places to do business. We don't have a corporate income tax on anybody in Wyoming except for one industry, oil and gas. We just call it a severance tax. So, Mr. Chairman, it's a policy of this committee and the body to raise royalty rates. That would, on state lands, that would certainly be your choice. But do it with eyes wide open, that moves us in the wrong direction in terms of where we want to be in terms of overall expense on Wyoming's primary economic driver. the oil and gas industry. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, with respect to market rates and all of that sort of thing, we can go round and round on that. It's very difficult. I have just an enormous amount of sympathy for the Office of State Lands and Investments on this issue. It's very difficult for them in a number of ways. It's difficult for them because they're asked to do a lot of things that's outside their wheelhouse by the legislature, and they don't have the resources to do it. There are other mitigating factors. We don't have a situation where information is shared back and forth that would inform so-called market rates. But I think you all know, because primarily many of you on this committee are businessmen first and foremost. You know, as was testified earlier this morning, that if the state rate is here and the private rate is here, and you move this one up, this one goes up. They play off each other. So of course it's in our interest to try to mitigate that expense as much as we possibly can, of course. But simply saying that the state is getting less or a fee is getting less, we can bring up anecdotes all over the place about that. We can have anecdotes where state lands are cheaper than fee. I can bring anecdotes on the other side, where in rights of way and other things, private, what the state is charging well exceeds market rate and well exceeds what neighboring private landowners get. It essentially comes out in a wash, Mr. Chairman, and trying to put your thumb on it here to fix that is, I think will have consequences that you don't appreciate, or that I don't appreciate, maybe I should say. Finally, Mr. Chairman, with respect to land transfers, I'm not here to speak in favor or against the particular land transfer that was brought up this morning. That's not my role. However, Mr. Chairman, I would say that there is a legitimate process in place for making a recommendation about land transfers, and that landowners can oppose that. That's well within their rights, perfectly fine. Legislators can oppose it, perfectly fine, no problem. But the process is there and it exists, and if we'd like to come together and figure out a way to change that process, that's totally fine. But Mr. Chairman, charges of criminality, that goes too far. I'm a passionate guy, and I've said things before that caused me to have to apologize later. I've been there. But Mr. Chairman, that was too far. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to take questions.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Boner.
Well, thank you for being here, Mr. Obermiller. And to be clear, I want to delineate, you're right, I should have clarified exactly why I meant to say criminal mindset, which the way I understand that is somebody who's going to follow the rules, but in a way that undermines the intent of the rules. So let's be very clear, criminal mindset, 2 words, not a actual charge of criminal behavior. And I want an opportunity for clarifying that. Thank you for giving that opportunity, because I don't want that to be misinterpreted. So, and I agree with you 100% that, yeah, that's the rules that we have now, and they're following the rules, absolutely, but in a way that completely undermines all the other statutes that we have regarding good faith negotiations, split estate situations. As you know, there's avenues through our statutes and through our legal system for these instances where we disagree about what the good faith negotiation means and so on. So I think you're gonna have a hard time convincing me that they aren't trying to circumvent all of that. And so that's what I mean when I say criminal mindset. It's not necessarily a criminal act per se. I'm not saying that at all. I'm pointing out the idea that you're going to use the rules to undermine the intent of our laws, which I think we can all agree deal with very sensitive situations, very sensible or sensitive circumstances, and they're tough discussions to have in this body. So I'm not going to apologize for that, because I think it undermines the hard work that we do in this body to come to some sort of balance. It undermines, frankly, I think the work of the vast majority of your clients who are not engaging in this behavior. And so I want to clarify, that's not a charge of criminality. Criminal mindset is one that uses the rules to undermine the intent. In this situation where the stakes are very high, that's why I use such strong language. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermuller, appreciate you coming down to clarify some of these facts and you know, it just proves the point. You can take data and make it look however you want it to look. And by taking those royalty rates and not look at the holistic, what all of the rates are and bringing it all together, it makes it skewed. So I appreciate you coming down and bringing that point out, that there are severance taxes and property taxes and ad valorem taxes and all those that need to be looked at as a whole rather than just the royalty rates. So I appreciate you doing that. The question I have, we heard some discussion about EOG and their proposed land exchange. And they are proposing to give up some very valuable property right here around this city in order to get some property up in Converse and Campbell counties where they're actively drilling. Without them being here to give us some more information, do you have any idea why they want to make that transaction, that exchange? What their intent is to have ownership of the property up there and give up ownership of some prime real estate down here next to the city limits?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, thank you for the question. I'm unable to answer it. I cannot speak to the motives of EOG in this case. And again, it's not my role to support or oppose any particular land transaction that any one company is trying to effectuate. I would merely argue that, and they're not here, but to my knowledge, they weren't invited. I imagine they would probably be willing to meet with you and discuss it to the extent that they can, since it's in the analysis process, but I won't put words in their mouth and I won't speculate as to their motives.
Yeah, and the committee had no idea EOG would even be brought up, so there wasn't any way of knowing ahead of time. We should have invited them, but we can have that conversation at some point. Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I probably was the one that led off that conversation, and I didn't do it with an intent to cause oil and gas a bunch more money. That you got to believe me on that, because in 21, I actually ran a personal property tax depreciation bill for industry. That's what I ran that bill for. Of course, we never went anywhere with that. But anyways, at least in my intent, I've worked in industry all my life, and the last of my intentions is to cause a hardship on the extraction industry. That wasn't my intent at all. I got my question answered, and I was happy with that. I want to apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Senator Boner.
Yeah, and just to be clear about what, and part of the reason getting the committee materials the way they were, we wanted to give that broad overview of how much state lands contributes to our schools. And the point that I was trying to raise, frankly, was that overall, it's a pretty small piece of the pie, literally. You saw it was about, 2% from the actual leases and so on. The investments are much larger. So thanks for, reminding us of the obvious that, when it comes to school funding, for example, this is probably not exactly the big piece of the pie that was maybe in 1890. And that was part of the point of, having that discussion, because, overall, this is a much smaller portion of our revenue for K-12 or for anything really, due in a small part to our tax structure. Just to reiterate what I said this morning, that 6% severance tax does affect everything. It should affect our state rate, affects the private rate, in my opinion. That's why, you see the differences in the royalty rate from, say, a state like Texas and Wyoming. It's right around 6%. And there's a reason for that. It's because the state takes a big chunk out of it. So, yeah, I think in terms of the actual policy that we'll be discussing here today, I'm not looking personally to change anything dealing with oil and gas, except that the statutes. I think we need to, I'm mostly interested in making sure that we leverage the landowner for the part of the negotiations, so because they have an actual knowledge of the market rate. That development is happening within the context of a lot of private land in many cases. So I think in terms of the actual policy changes that we might make in statute, oil and gas was not my focus in terms of the statute changes, and that's why we didn't go out of the way to talk to you beforehand. Obviously, it's the beginning of the process, so I guess if I am going to apologize, it's for that we weren't, we're looking at grazing mostly, but certainly acknowledge that oil and gas is going to be part of it. I don't have any ideas as far as changing the process they go through, and certainly, as we get going on some bill drafts, hopefully your organization is absolutely going to play a key part in whatever changes may happen with mineral development. Whether actual changes or we're just putting current practice and statute will remain to be seen. But Obviously, the focus of this committee is probably going to be a lot of ag and grazing leases, but certainly we're taking a broad look at all of these statutes, which I think we've heard are quite antiquated. So just want to make sure we're clear on that. Like I said, if I'm going to apologize for anything, it's for not letting you know that we're going to, this would come up. I didn't think it was going to be, quite the focus that it was, but, like I said, it was the beginning of the process. We'll be getting the bill draft going here soon. So.
Yeah, we'll try. We're going to revisit this as we hopefully try to draft some legislation. You'll be invited to that because mineral leasing is an integral part of the state land and the state property. That Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermueller, so in my tenure in the legislature, we've dropped the production, the first production for 6 months, dropped the severance rate on it. I believe 3 days later, we went to negative $40 oil and it knocked the rig count to zero, the first time in the history of the state. We've done all kinds of things to basically give away state lands, portions of state lands for industry, and it hasn't really helped in production. We're our lowest rig count ever. When we look at severance tax at 6% based on $115 oil, and we are still at half the rig count we were at $40 oil, I just don't see the connection in my tenure in the legislature. I mean, I see the logic behind it, but at the end of the day, A doesn't equal B. I think a lot of these are global issues when you start talking Middle East. The severance rate or the royalty rate, when you go to $115 oil like we are right now, it seems to almost be irrelevant in comparison. When you get down on the bottom side, maybe in the 40s, maybe it counts, but right now it seems to be an irrelevant factor.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just assuming that was a rhetorical speech.
What's that?
I didn't know if there was a question there.
No, I don't think there was.
Okay.
You may give a speech as well if you'd like. I'll give you that opportunity. Thank you for coming before the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I would just say that Representative Clausen is correct that we are at, as of this week, we're at 19 rigs. Prior to the pandemic, we were at about 32. We are having difficulties coming back. And, Representative Clausen and I will just agree to disagree about whether or not making production more expensive helps or hurts that effort.
Well, I can tell you as I lease my own minerals that factor of whether the royalty rate would decrease the profit of an oil company played into how the contract was set up. And I believe that a pretty balanced royalty rate was probably fair. And I think State Lands has probably done a fairly adequate job of trying to figure out what that rate ought to be. So are we done? Oh, we got one more. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Obermueller. Nice to see you in another capacity. I just wanted to state about businesses. I don't blame a business for doing business and making money. I think you work within the law, and that's just how, that's my last rhetorical thing I'll say. The other question I had was more towards the royalty rates, and in particular, I mean, there's a 16.67 and then a 12.5 if it doesn't go for at the 16.67, which is the 16 2/3. What do you think, your opinion about having a stepped royalty rate where let industry decide on what it's worth? In other words, in some cases it might be worth 20, in other cases it may be worth 10. For a royalty rate, it depends probably on the play. There's a lot of factors I assume go into this. But what's your thoughts on having another approach instead of just a two-tiered approach for the current way the state deals with royalty rates? Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, Commissioner Kolb. Etiquette is you always refer to an elected official by their highest office. So Commissioner Kolb. Appreciate the question. I'm not prepared to talk about various options, though I can say that we're always open to talking about ways to improve the system. if there are ways that we could set up a tiered approach or a negotiated approach or something like that looks different than today, that is better, certainly open to that. I think what we found, particularly with respect to issues related to permit rules and ad valorem payments and all of that, is what oftentimes we end up just trading one set of baggage for another. And, you know, we get some good out of it and some bad, and we always move forward. But that doesn't mean we have to be static in what we're doing right now.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Overby.
I sure appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes. Any other public testimony? Okay, we'll close the public testimony and have a discussion on possible bill drafts after this.
Mr. Chairman,
Where are we at? Down here.
make a motion that we draft a bill to audit the state lands with an appropriations. I'm not sure how much appropriations yet.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking into it, but I do not yet have that. It could be part of the bill drafting process to look into.
So I need a second.
We have a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Representative Worf. Discussion on that? Okay. Oh, Heather. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, is there any more specificity than to audit state lands? Because that's so broad, I don't know that we could even zero in on an amount. A specific transaction or something?
So I'd open that up to the committee as to what we're trying to narrow it down to. Okay, go ahead. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Question to LSO staff, do we have the authority to do that? I don't know, I'm asking an open-ended question. Do we have the authority to ask such a thing or to do such a thing?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, there are several different ways to accomplish something along the lines of what you're describing. One that Chairman Eklund and I had discussed was a bill draft that would essentially, as Representative Blackburn has just said, he has called it an audit, but it also, depending on what the committee wants, it could be a study or report that, you know, requires certain things to come, certain information to come from the entity, or can direct some other entity to get the information. That was the form of a bill draft that we were kind of discussing, Chairman Eklund and I. There's also the possibility, although it would not necessarily be in the form of this bill draft that's being requested right now, but the possibility of going to the JAC at their budget requests to ask that some sort of an audit be done, either the OSLI bring in someone to do an audit, or the Department of Audit, or someone, you know, depending on what the committee requested. And then a third option, I guess that was kind of two for JAC, depending on who you ask to do it. But then another option would be that if you were to perhaps bring it before the Management Audit Committee also, which would involve LSO folks and then the people to whom they would reach out. So it's a matter of who the committee wants to do it, if they want to, what many do is, I think last year you may recall that the Wyoming Business Wyoming Business Council, they had been given an appropriation, not through this committee, but to hire an outside auditor to then audit to some of the funds that were the ARPA funds. So it depends on it really depends on what the committee asks and what they are requesting as far as the authority to do it. If it's the form of a bill, typically often, I shouldn't say typically, but often that would be a study. And then it's a matter of who the committee asks to do the study. And then it's a matter of the committee then arguing on the floor and passing it. But these other routes, are just depending on the committee's preference, other routes.
Representative Worf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would not use the term audit. That's what the motion was. I seconded that so that we'd have a discussion. What I would like to see is, I would like to see an investigation into the Lehman exchange that was referenced. I really think we need to know, and I'm not looking to turn this over to anybody other than our committee. I believe our committee is over ag, and I think it's been alleged that maybe some of the rules weren't followed as the law dictates that they should have been. And I think that this committee should be looking into that. We should be holding an investigation, whatever you want to call that, a hearing. I know that we have the ability to have a hearing and call people before this committee. I'm not looking to turn this over to management audit or anybody else. Management council, I think what was told this committee today was we had a problem where the law was not followed. We have an individual that was directly impacted by some things that transpired, and it is going to be, it's a can of worms. Nobody understands. I mean, we have the former director of the State Department, or the state lands, that's now the Attorney General, that's in question of all this. But I think it has to be looked into, and I think this committee should look at it. We know what the rules are. We know what the process is, and we should be asking people what happened. And like I said, I'm not looking, I know I don't have the authority to prosecute anybody, but we passed House Bill 3 with the intent of handling vacant lands. We already heard today that there's over 140,000 other vacant lands that are potentially subject to have the same problem. I want to make sure that whatever happened with this Lehman exchange, that it's not allowed to replicate. I want to make sure that House Bill 3 is sufficient to cover that. And that's what I would like to see as the motion. And Mr. Representative Blackburn's the one that brought that, so.
We had two problems presented us. One of them was dealing with land transfers. You're dealing with just the vacant lands issue that kind of went sideways. All right, so at least we got her narrowed down a bit. Go ahead.
So,
Okay.
so Mr. Chairman, we heard 3 cases right here on the floor today. We heard 3 or 4 times that the director stated that they had probably made a mistake. So is there 3? Is there 6? Is there 9? I think that's what we need to find out. How many is there? How do we help to rectify it so it doesn't happen again? Some have suggested a study. I've studied stuff till I'm blue in the face and there's never an outcome. We just study it, no, here it is, here's your study. So who has power and authority? I don't know, this committee may have that power because state lands is our wheelhouse. That's part of our responsibility. The director stated that he's open and wants to be transparent, and audit doesn't bother him a bit. So I don't know what a full-blown audit even looks like. I don't have a clue. But let's do the best and the most we can do and fix the problem.
Yeah, Senator Boner.
Okay, so committee, there are some very specific circumstances, and before I get, if you give me a little bit of leeway, it seems to me if I could boil it down to some root problems. I get the impression that the Office of State Lands has a lot going on. That this is just one portion of what they do. They also do a lot of loans and grants. That's completely different from administering over almost 4 million acres of minerals and 3.5 million acres of actual surface. In addition, it sounds like at least once a month the director's chairing the Oil and Gas Commission. So I think that their scope is too large, and I think what the stockgrowers said is accurate, that, these things are becoming much more complex and that we have to reassess the organization the way it is. So that's one thing I think we could do, is to reassess whether, especially the loan and grants program, needs to stay within the Office of State Lands and Investments, or whether we need to move it to a different agency. That hopefully would free up and let them focus. Also, looks like there's things we can do to provide more statutory guidance, with the leasing process. That could be another bill draft. House Bill 3 was a response to the Lehman situation, as well as others throughout the state. They weren't the only ones. And once again, I think we saw the need to clarify that instance, the vacant land process, to make sure that that something like that doesn't happen again. So that there is a clear process and they're not left to rules, regulations, or just plain old judgment based off of the resources they have about what goes forward and what doesn't. So sure, I mean, they have lots of information regarding that particular instance. And I know because it's been publicly available on their website. You can go and look what the examiner said in that case. And the only questions I really have is for the Board of Land Commissioners that voted to overturn the what the examiner came up with. And so if we're gonna use what we do as a committee, maybe we can just have this, make sure the committee has those materials available to them. Then maybe ask the Board of Land Commissioners to come back and, see if they remember the case and what they remember about it, why they voted to reverse the decision of the examiner. So we could do that if that qualifies as an investigation and appropriate use of this committee's abilities to provide oversight. Then we could do it that way. I share also staff's concern with the motion. I don't know exactly, audit of what and how. We need more clarity with the motion. So I submit to you that we have done some work regarding vacant lands, and we could continue to work on the sheer number of vacant leases that are out there. I think that's a problem, once again, stemming, I think, from some of the organizational problems, but there's other things we can do, I think, to make that less burdensome on the agency. And so, not for or against the motion, as I understand it. I'm just pointing out it's incredibly broad, and I think it's something we can accomplish even during this interim, with the focus being on the policies and the procedures that we have, as well as the organization. That's something that also very much fall within our wheelhouse. So that's my very broad discussion on that motion.
I'm thinking that the bringer of the motion was talking about an overview of the problems presented, which were two basic issues. One was on the land transfer, state land transfer, and the other one was on vacant lands. And the second was on vacant lands only. So we probably need to clarify that in this discussion, if we could, on what you want to do and whether you want a bill for it or you want to just run a further investigation on what happened, because I'm not sure. Some of it we can't even find out about because it's in it's privileged information that we might not even get. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with the attorneys. Go ahead,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, we've heard some passionate testimony here today. And many times the legislature, first thing we want to do is draft a bill to fix the problem with a bill. But I don't think we're ready for that. I think we need to have some facts and determine what is really going on before we decide what route we're going to take, which path we're going to take. I don't think we need a financial audit. That's not the question, the point. The point is we have some things that transpired over the past number of years that may or may not have been according to rules. We don't know what happened. And to draft a bill at this point, I think is presumptive. I would like to see a fact-finding effort by this committee. And who do we assign that to so it's unbiased? Well, I think we need to do it ourselves. We need to find out the facts and report back to this committee what actually is happening, so it's unbiased, and then we can respond to that. But, to assign it to another department, that I don't know if we'll get all the facts that way. I think this committee needs to find out what transpired, and then we can react. If we need to write a bill, let's write a bill. But first and foremost, I think we need to get the facts.
Senator, go ahead.
And I think, if you look at the examiner's report, it's actually quite exhaustive, and I want the committee to get wrapped around the comments around, attorney-client privilege. I think the committee would be satisfied that all the facts are laid out in that, in that document alone. So,
Senator,
so-
sorry. Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Blackburn.
So Senator Boner, what examiner? You said examiner, what examiner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just when you appeal the decision of the director, it goes through an appeals process.
So we haven't had an examiner examine anything yet, right?
No, there has been, actually, in the circumstances we heard about. So I'm just saying that there's a document that is produced as a result of that I actually think would.
Thank you, Senator, I
provide a
understand
lot
that,
of-
but
okay.
you led me to believe there already been an examination.
There is.
There is, that's what I'm
There
saying.
is, it's done.
Yeah.
And the examination went in the favor of Lehman's. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. Go ahead, Representative Worf.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess just to try to close this all down, get it done, I would propose that what we have is we hold a hearing. It could be added one more day on our interim. We're already doing stuff. I think we should have a hearing where we have the ability to call people in to come testify and provide information. I think that's our job as duly elected legislators, is to look into this and to find out what went wrong. I mean, clearly, if the examiner found in favor of the Lehmans and they didn't get what they should have gotten, there's still a problem here. And it's not going to fix itself. And I do know that we can do that. That's our purview. We can call a hearing and we can actually call people in to testify before this committee. We can ask questions and they can't say, well, we don't need to tell you that. It's our right, it's our duty, it's our obligation to ask hard questions. And some people might not like to answer them, but that's why we get to call people. We would be able to call people to that specific hearing and look at it. There's 2 points that were brought up. One deals with the Lehmans, the other one deals with the process that's still in place dealing with EOG. And I don't know, I didn't mention that one because I think it's still in play. And I don't know if this committee wants to interfere. The Lehman issue's done. We had an examiner that issued an opinion that was in favor of the Lehmans, yet they're still being harmed. They didn't get what they should have been given. And I guess to me, I want to find out why that didn't happen. I don't know anybody that's involved. I learned just like you did today. But I think that would be my recommendation. I would ask the bringer of the motion if he would agree to change his motion to where we would have a hearing to specifically deal with that topic.
Before we can do that, I'm going to kind of go in what I know of the committee process has to be. If we were to ask for another day, we'd have to go to management council. If we vary from what the subject was, which I don't think we'd vary, it might be broad enough in the state lands issue that we have as our number one priority to bring that up. I'm thinking if we didn't ask for the extra day, we could hold a partial day of hearing. Am I correct on that, Heather? We could probably continue this conversation.
Mr. Chairman, the committee has been, just through the interim topic process, I believe that there have been 6 days approved. And I think that I heard you say, if you didn't ask for another day, it could be part of your 6 days?
Yeah.
And, but if you thought that it would go longer, then you would need to request more. And I believe that is the case, yes.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Co-Chairman.
And to be clear, Mr. Chairman, I think it comes down to, I mean, you'll see State Lands has already agreed to provide you the information. I understand you're kind of just learning about this now. It's something I've been dealing with as a constituent issue for years. And like I said, we've had a legislative result as a, coming out of this process. I think, the thing that I still question is the decision by the Board of Land Commissioners, which we can't, have a statute that dictates what, how they apply the facts to the law. That there's an element of judgment there. So if we're going to have a a hearing, you call it, I'd probably just call it a regular committee meeting where they can come and I think it'd be helpful for us to understand how they interact in the process, because right now we just got the agency in front of us. And at the end of the day, if we trust the Board of Land Commissioners to make a decision. So I think I would benefit from learning how they operate on their end. I think we got a good idea of the agency process. Perhaps it'd be sufficient to, in this pertinent example, have them, come justify and explain how they see this, and we need to get their side of the story too. We're talking about them, they're not here, right? So if nothing else, fairness would dictate that we have them here as a result of the public testimony today. So I'm not sure if we even need a motion, but this is going to be, it's our number one topic. It'll be at all three of our meetings, I guarantee you. It's very complex, and you see the challenges and the importance of the decisions that the Board of Land Commissioners make each and every day have serious consequences for our citizens. And who knows how many others they have to make, even in a single meeting. So I think it'd be good to get their perspective. And like I said, I think you'll be satisfied with the documents that State Lands has regarding this issue in particular, or at least I was, as I dug into it. And so we'll have a good factual basis at our next meeting to ask some questions to the Board of Land Commissioners.
Representative Senator Costa, I'm sorry, I demoted you and did not mean to do that. Go ahead.
Demoting, promoting, who knows? It's all okay. I'm pretty much going along with co-chairman. I think we need some facts. We need some more information so that we can make a good educated decision about, okay, what is our next step? Is our next step having some kind of a hearing or whatever? But I think to put the horse before, or the carriage before the horse might be a little problematic here. I think in our best interest for everybody is let's get more information from others and gather that together so that we can make an educated decision as what's our next step. That to me would make more sense at this point. Thank you.
Senator Cole.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Just quickly, I've heard someone's issues on what they experienced, but I haven't heard both sides. I think I need to see the data. I agree with Chairman, Co-Chairman Boner, that we need to have more data. And I'm not willing to go forward on something that I don't know the facts on. I need to see them. I think there's probably nothing more embarrassing than doing something and finding out you went down a blind alley with no way to turn around. So I think we need more data. I think we need to review, I need to review the data. I'll just speak for myself, and in order to make an educated decision. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Okay, Representative Clausen.
Maybe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my thought on this is I'd like to ask LSO, and if we're going to keep, I'm sure state lands are going to be on our next three issues, but a judicial remedy for something like this, if we don't follow our own rules or statutes, I'd like to ask LSO if we have a judicial remedy in this, and if we don't, if we can draft a judicial remedy for these cases that are clearly outside their own rules.
Okay. Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I use the term hearing for a specific purpose. If we hold a hearing, we have the ability to subpoena people to come to that meeting. And so people can't stay at home and say, well, I didn't know about it. But that gives us the ability, when we have a hearing, it gives us the ability to tell people they have to be here. And I don't want to hear somebody telling me that we can't ask those questions because nobody's there to answer it. And that's the problem. There is some questions that I can tell you, nobody's wanting to answer them. And as uncomfortable as that may be, I think we need to insist that those questions are answered. And I agree, we don't have, I won't even say we have half the information. I will say we have a share of the information, but given the fact that the examiner ruled in favor of them and they still haven't been awarded that, to me, there's a problem with that. And I don't see how any of us at this table can say that that isn't the case. And so we need to have the ability to tell people they have to be here, because I don't want to just have another meeting and go, oh, they never showed up. That's why it's called a hearing. And I can tell you, I've done this before. And it is something that we have the authority to do. We can call a hearing before our committee. And we should be finding the solution to this problem. So I think we beat the horse to death. But Mr. Chairman, I think the bringer of the motion needs to either.
Representative Blackburn, go ahead. You had something to say? Have you already forgotten what you were going to say? I do this often.
I'll go along with the change on that motion. To have
You
hearing.
withdraw the motion?
No.
No.
I go-
Okay.
no.
What?
Yeah,
Well,
And
then,
I agree with,
I don't know what we're voting on yet.
So vote no.
Okay. Yeah, so the
I'll
motion
help you,
is,
Yeah,
what was the motion?
I'll help you. The motion is that this committee would call for a hearing, and it would be a hearing.
It was to draft a bill.
No, I don't want to draft a bill. I want to have a hearing. Did you want to have a hearing, or do you want to have a bill?
What was the motion, Heather?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the original motion was to audit state land, OSLI, and then I'm a little bit uncertain as far as specifically what the motion is, because the committee has hearings, like there's a hearing at the moment, so it would be a matter of what the agenda is for your next meeting, for the next hearing, unless you're talking about a specific separate hearing for which to go request the day from Management Council. So I'm uncertain of which, what the motion is. Is it to have a completely separate hearing, or to have this as part of your next meeting hearing? The one, and that is scheduled in September.
No. I think the quickest way to do it is to go with the question on the vote. All those in favor say aye, or on the bill, which we don't
Voting
know.
on.
I don't,
So I'm gonna take the liberty, if Mr. Representative Blackburn will give it to me.
hold on. Do you have clarification on what you want? Want to be voting? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the motion that I believe we both would like to make is that we have a hearing. And I don't care if I'm going to leave it to the chairman, if you guys think we have the time that's already slated, if we can carve out, I think you need to have at least half a day that's dedicated to a hearing. And that we would have a hearing to find an answer about what happened with this Lehman decision, why the examiner came to the conclusion that they came to, and why we went down the path we went down. That's the motion, and I think it's up to this body to decide whether you want to do it. So I would call for the question on the motion.
I've got a question on the meeting, so how long, we probably need to know, we have 2 days in September, am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is what is currently planned,
Okay,
although there is not a set agenda yet.
there's not what?
No agenda has been set yet
Okay.
for the meeting.
Correct. All right, so that's a motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. We'll have a show of hands. I don't know how it went. All those in favor, raise your hands. Okay, the motion passes. So then yeah, we'll have it at our next meeting, and I think if we run over on the meeting, then we just will. That's
Mr.
probably a
Chairman.
better way to do it than to try to get another day. What?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want us to remember before we start this is not to beat people up. This is only to get information. I mean, I've been in committee meetings where representatives have tried to beat up people in citizenry, and I don't go for it. So we're not going to beat people up.
Okay, so I think one thing that would benefit the whole committee is to get information ahead of time. So I'm kind of directing it to our attorneys that if we can get as much of the information and fact-finding as happened and study that ahead of time, we can probably get this done fairly quickly, and then we have a pretty good idea of who we need to invite to the hearing. Now that, to me, will be the bigger problem, so. Committee okay with that? All right. Yes. Chairman Boner.
So a few other bill drafts, like I said, we mostly deal with policy and procedure and as well as organization. So I'll have two bill draft motions here. The first one being, like I said before, I'm concerned about the workload at state lands. And just as a starting point, I'd move that we draft a bill to move the Grants and Loans Division from state lands to business council. Just to get going.
Okay. Go ahead and explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think that, like I said, we just heard one portion of what state lands and investments does. It's incredibly complex. You know, there's lots of surface acres, lots of mineral acres. Then in addition to that, there's a whole other portion of what they do, administering grants and loans for, cities and towns, things I'm sure our county commissioners can go all into that. A business ready community program in the business council is similar. There's opportunities for synergy and efficiencies if we move it to the business council. Not saying that's the end result, but I think we need to have a bill draft ready and we can change it later if we don't want to send it to the business council. We can do something else, but I'm really concerned about what we're asking of our state lands and investments. I think it's leading to situations like we heard about today. And if we can take a systematic overview of what we can do to set the policy to help deal with these challenges, I think this would be one thing that needs to be on the table.
Okay, Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask Co-Chair Boner, will you repeat that? I didn't hear the first part of what you said, because I know you were specific about what portion, and I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Can you repeat that, please?
Grants and Loans Division, so the portion that deals with all the grants and loans, yeah.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Wharf. Does the committee understand this? It would basically take a segment of bill draft to take a segment of the grants and loans from state lands. They have enough responsibility, and try to get it to Wyoming Business Council where it might be more appropriate to have that. You clear on it? Ready to vote? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Well, let's have a show of hands. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that passes. So are you clear on that proposal? Yes. Or that for bill draft? Yes. Okay. All right. Now, another one?
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, I move we have another bill draft that looks at leasing procedures generally, and I can pick off a few things I want to be specifically included, and certainly look for amendments from the committee if we want to go down that route. But specifically, I'd like that we look at increasing the $2,000 limit for improvements for ag and grazing leases, at least adjust it for inflation. Look at, sounds like we can't do anything for the 10-year lease term, but we can at least do something like South Dakota did. It makes it a little bit easier for the lessee to say it may automatically reapply when that 10-year term is up. Once again, the idea being that we have a lot of vacant leases that, and hopefully that cut down the number of vacant leases and continue to get paid for those as we have an obligation to do. Also, codify that the ag and grazing leaseholder can take the lead for mineral development or any other sort of additional development on the state school section. So codify that, what I would like to believe is a current practice. And then flesh out our land exchange statutes, which, if I'm not mistaken, are literally just a single sentence. We provide no direction whatsoever. We have Representative Western's bill. I don't know if he wants that included or not. It's up to him. But also some language along the lines that no land exchange should involve private parties or affect private negotiations or something along those lines, dealing with the land exchange challenge that we heard about moving forward. Certainly can't affect the current challenge, but just acknowledging that there's a greater context there, so. So that would be the motion. Like I said, general bill dealing with leasing procedures, those are the provisions I would like to see. But if I get a second, we could have amendments to add to draft language if you'd like.
Do you want them all in one bill, or do you want separate bill drafts for each subject?
For now, we could keep them all, and like I said, this is just a bill draft, and we can divvy them up later if we want to. But like I said, I think we do have to get a bill draft going. Like I said, that's a laundry list of things I'd like specifically included, open to amendments if people want other things included specifically. But really asking for a pretty broad authority to get a bill draft going to have the conversation.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, question on the bill draft. Second, oh, I'm sorry. A second now? Any further discussion? Mr. Chair. Yes, go ahead. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I'll go along with the bill draft to work the bill. I'm not going to say I'm happy with every part of what was suggested, but I'll go along with it to work it. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay. All right.
Just discussion, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote against it just because I think the list is too long. And, that's the reason why I'm going to vote against it. But if it passes, it passes. It's not that I don't support it. I just think it's too much, too big of a bite.
Okay. All right. Well, so just on that subject, if we bring these materials to the next meeting, we can craft the bill however we want. If we want to split it into subjects, which I'm guessing we might do to try to get any of them passed, we probably can do that, but.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, so
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if we're planning on doing that, why don't we just wait till the next meeting and draft the separate bills in instead of trying to put
Well, that's
all the meeting in
what
one?
the motion is for,
All right,
to go ahead and draft a bill with these subjects included,
that's what I'm saying. Why are we doing that at all?
because,
Then you're wanting to
We want-
separate it on the next meeting.
no, we want the how we would draft the bill to come to us at the next meeting. We don't have that here. We have the general idea of what we'd like to look at, the changes that could be made. Go ahead, Senator, did you? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's important that one way or the other, we have some materials in front of us. It could be one bill, it could be 6 different bills, depending on how we want to crack that egg. I think, no matter what we get going here today, it's really important that we do something so we can, it's going to be a heavy lift. It's important that we get going today. So whether it's all included in one bill or it can be separated out into 5 or 6 different ones, I'm fairly agnostic on that. And I'm completely open to the committee's direction as to what route we take. I see a lot of wisdom in having, however many different bill drafts, but at this point, I just want to have it all broad, all-inclusive document so as to encourage the greatest amount of discussion possible.
Ooh. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the reality is, as we're drafting the bill and as going through the different levels of review, even through LSO, before it even gets to the meeting, because it's gone through several levels by the time we come to a committee meeting, even if we tried to merge it all into one, it very well could be that a subsequent reviewer would say, wow, this topic's totally not the same as that one. So what I'm not saying is that I would go against the committee's wishes, but it might even just through the process come out as more than one bill because of the different topics, unless it could be like some overarching, like you said, leasing procedures overall. I am uncertain until I get into the drafting of really whether it's 1 or 4 or what have you bills.
Does a motion, will it satisfy the ability to do that, to split it up or to keep it together? We're okay with the way the motion is made then? We're good?
Mr. Chairman, as long as the committee knows what it's voting on, it can even just direct us, and it doesn't need a motion to tell us to draft a bill. So as long as you are clear, or as long as we're clear on what you're telling me, or if you are going to take a vote, as long as the committee is clear as what they are voting on, that it is that we have the leeway to have it be one or more bills, then certainly that could be a part of this.
So before we vote, could you break it down for us on the,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, what we have is a motion that I believe was Chairman Boner and moved by Chairman Boner, and I think it was Representative Clausen, second, to have a bill draft about leasing procedures, or have one or more bill drafts about leasing procedures to include at least the change in, which is in 36-5-110, from the $2,000 to something, and I don't have what you want the limit to be on the improvements, so perhaps you can advise on that. And then also to have to address the process about reapplying after a 10-year lease term is up. And then also, and this one I'm a little bit fuzzy on, had already kind of made a note to go back and listen to it again, about the codifying the grazing or mineral on the state school section portion. So I was going to ask you a bit more clarification on that. And then also recognizing that notice and negotiations with private parties and with the multiple parties that could be involved in negotiations when there are land exchanges. So it's pretty broad, and certainly if we don't go into more detail right at the moment during this meeting, then I would need to be able to work with Chairman Boner, or I know that I believe it was Representative Western's bill on the notice, or what have you, just to kind of call a friend, or however that goes, during the drafting of this.
Yes, for sure. I think that, maybe give LSO the flexibility, whether it's one bill draft or several, they can present their best professional judgment. All right, so I'll go ahead and modify, if a second's okay, give them that flexibility. And if you need a specific number for improvements, let's say 4,000, but my intent is to take the last time that was updated and adjust it for inflation, basically. That's my intent. I don't know what the number is, but we can look at that. As far as the leaseholder, ag and grazing leaseholder, negotiating for the state when it comes to other development on that school section, I believe we heard testimony that that's current practice, and so, but it's in rules, not statutes. The starting point for that would simply to put that procedure in statute, and then we can go from there and see what changes, if any, need to be made. So hopefully that makes everything absolutely clear. Like I said, if we don't want to say those are the only ideas we need to take up, this is a very broad topic. We got all 3 meetings to look at it. So if there's anything else the committee wants to consider, that was just a starting point.
are there other topics you wanted to add to this? Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I think I heard 4 topics, is that correct?
4.
I just think they're all too broad together to put together, so I would rather we break them down somehow. I don't know if I want to
We've
vote for
given
all of
the
them together.
LSO has the flexibility to break them into topics. One would be raising the improvements from 2,000 without board approval to something else, whatever inflation is. Reapplying for 10-year, reapplying for grazing, codifying instead of rules for the leasing procedure, and then land. I'm not sure what we're going to do on land exchanges. Okay, all right. Okay. All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, let's have a raise of hands in favor. Opposed? Passes. I think it was 7-6. Did I get the right numbers?
Yes,
Someone
that'll be
vote
7.
twice. I didn't have to vote. Huh? Okay. What's that?
Never mind.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are we good? Okay.
Where's my?
Clear as mud. Will be much more clear as we get into this, I'm sure. I think everybody kind of understands we made a very minor change to statutes and trying to clarify the vacant land deal, and it was difficult. We got vetoed the first time. We passed a bill of Westerns, Cyrus's, that with land exchanges, it also got vetoed, and so it's just a tough process, and we might as well start tackling it now. Okay, we're ready to move on. I am ready to move on. So we're going on to health and forest management, forest health and management briefing. Come on up, Bill.
Chair, I'm going to slide another chair in here if we can, because there's 4 of us.
Okay. Go ahead and start when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Bill Crapser. I'm the state forester. We do a forest health briefing and forest condition briefing for the committee every year. We normally do it during the session. This year you had a couple minor issues like the budget and redistricting that you were dealing with, so the chairman decided to have us do this briefing during your first committee meeting. With me today is Josh Jackson. He's the forestry lead for Wyoming BLM. Next to him is Deb Oakson. She's the deputy regional forester for Region 4 out of Ogden, Utah. And at the far end of the table is Jackie Buchanan, the deputy regional forester for Region 2 out of Denver. In your meeting books, you'll find 2 documents, 2021 Forest Health Highlights. That's a publication put together by State Forestry and the U.S. Forest Service, and then our Wyoming State Forestry 2021 annual report. Those are both in your meeting books. Mountain pine beetle populations have dropped back to endemic levels after the epidemic population experience over the last 20 years. Several reasons for this: natural cycle of the beetles, the drought has had a little bit to do with it, even though that had stressed some trees. And in several areas, the mountain pine beetle frankly ran out of food and dropped back to endemic levels. So now in the lodgepole pine, ponderosa pine forest across the state, we're really looking at more of a forest recovery than a beetle epidemic. And what do we do next? What type of management do we do on those forests? Spruce beetles, twig beetles, ips, and other bark beetles are still causing localized mortality across the state, but are not currently at epidemic levels anyplace. Spruce budworm is an insect that's of great concern and appears to be on the increase in many areas. Even though it's called spruce budworm, the main species it attacks is Douglas fir, because we don't want to make things too not confusing for everybody. It's a defoliator that attacks the needles of Douglas fir, puts the tree under extreme stress. A lot of instances causes mortality of the tree. If you drive from here to Laramie, as you go over the summit and down through Telephone Canyon, on the south side of the highway, that north-facing slope is all Douglas fir. You'll notice it's pretty gray. You also notice it's had a lot of thinning. There was a lot of brush piles. We've done a lot of burning in there. That is a piece of state trust land. What we did on that, it was heavily impacted with spruce budworm. We did a thinning from below to try to give the trees more vigor to fight off the budworm. We were counting on some rain the last couple years that we didn't get, so we're hoping that it still has a good impact, but it was the only treatment that we could really do to look at those, to save those trees. Spruce budworm is really prevalent in the South Bighorns, and it's also in the southern end of the Winds, and then, like I said, some places on the Pole Mountain and over into the Snowy Range, we're seeing a lot of spruce budworm. We're also seeing the impact of several invasive insects in cities and towns across the state. Japanese beetle was found in Sheridan area last year. It impacts mainly smaller trees, shrubs, that type of vegetation. We hadn't had Japanese beetle in the state. We thought it was just some transient beetles that had been brought in on vehicles, but this year we're seeing a lot of Japanese beetle in the Sheridan area, and it's causing quite a bit of concern. We haven't had a confirmed sighting of emerald ash borer in the state yet, but we do have emerald ash borer just to the south of us in Colorado, just to the east of us in Nebraska. When we think of ash, usually we think, well, we don't have a lot of ash in the state, but there's some, I believe it's Powell, I think 42% of the street trees in the city are ash, so we're pretty concerned about emerald ash borer. We work closely with the Forest Service. We do have traps in 20 communities around the state trying to trap emerald ash borer to see if we do have the insects here. Thousand canker disease has been detected in black walnut in the Cheyenne area. It goes after black walnut. Fortunately for the state, we don't have a huge black walnut population in any of our cities and towns. Shift into forest management for a minute. State forestry continues to work with private landowners across the state, assisting them in preparing management plans and providing technical assistance on forestry matters. With the support of the legislature and working closely with our federal partners, we continue to increase the use of Good Neighbor Authority projects across the state. GNA is a federal program that allows state to partner with the federal agencies to do management work on federal land, utilizing state staff, processes, and contracts. Using this program, we've been able to significantly increase management activities on federal lands across the state. Currently, we have all 5 of our authorized GNA foresters filled and are currently recruiting the GNA coordinator position. I'd remind the committee that the salaries for these positions, while they're state employees, the salaries for these positions are all being paid by the U.S. Forest Service as our partner to get the projects done. The legislature did appropriate some funds to help with the support of these positions and has been much appreciated. Finally, given the time of year it is, a word about fire. With the continued drought and fuel conditions, the predictive services tell us that the forecast is for a heavy fire season across much of the western United States. Forecast for Wyoming is for an above normal fire season across most of the state, mid-June through mid-October. So we're anticipating a pretty active fire season. At a state level, the Wyoming Hell Attack come on tomorrow and will be available for initial attack through the state. This program wouldn't be possible without the partnership with the Medicine Bow National Forest that provide us with crew members to help staff the Hell Attack and make the whole system work. Our state seats, our single engine air tankers, will come on board June 20th based at Casper Airport at the BLM tanker base. Again, like our Hell Attack, without our partnership with the BLM, it wouldn't be possible to have these aircraft because we utilize their tanker base, their management of the tanker base to support the aircraft. One note on the tanker base that's interesting. Everybody's dealing with staffing issues. I mean, you hear that with agencies, private industry, everybody across the country seems to have a hard time getting folks to work for them. The BLM was having the same issues with the tanker base in Casper as far as getting qualified managers for the tanker base. My staff was able to work with the BLM and we leveraged a deal with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, whose fire season is just about over by now. So most of this summer, the tanker base in Casper will be managed by Minnesota DNR employees that'll be on details out here. So I think it's a pretty good story of how we can put our heads together and figure out a solution that we couldn't individually. We're facing those same staffing issues as everybody else. Currently, up at our Smoke Buster program, our inmate program in Newcastle, currently of our 9 forestry positions up there, we have 5 vacancies. So our staffing this summer is going to be pretty light for the inmate program. DOC is still having the same issues, and they're having a lot of issues getting enough inmates that are qualified for our program. So we'll be running, instead of running 2 hand crews this year out of Newcastle, we'll be running 1 hand crew out of Newcastle to support the county's fire efforts. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my comments. I'd be glad to answer any questions now, or if you want to wait till after all my colleagues speak, I'll leave that entirely up to you. And I'll pass the mic to Josh Jackson with the BLM.
Are there any questions for Mr. Krapser? No? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the invitation to appear before you today and provide information about the BLM Wyoming's Forestry Fuels Program and forest conditions on Bureau-managed lands across the state. BLM in Wyoming has significant forest resources in the state, and the forestry program actively manages them for long-term health, resiliency, and economic opportunity. Earlier this spring, we had an opportunity to fly 2 vacant forester positions that had been vacant for over 2 years in 2 of our field offices, and those have since been filled. So for the first time in a long time, we're at full capacity in our forestry program in Wyoming. Based on a 2021 Department of the Interior economic analysis, the BLM forestry program in Wyoming contributes $2.2 million to the state's economy. In fiscal year 2022, our forest management budget in the state received a slight increase over fiscal year 21 funds. Additionally, we were able to compete for specific funding for forest health treatments in Wyoming, and we were able to attract some bill funding to put towards Good Neighbor Authority projects, which we are working to obligate with an assistance agreement with Wyoming State Forestry. For 2022, we're looking to attract bipartisan infrastructure legislation law funding to work towards addressing our reforestation backlog in the Black Hills, treatment of white bark pine stands, and accelerating our planned forest health and fuels reduction projects across the state. Our national target for timber in the state of Wyoming is 5 million board feet, and we're on track to sell or offer for sale around 8.5 million board feet this year, statewide. BLM Wyoming annually treats thousands of acres of forest land to reduce hazardous fuels and improve and restore forest health. Over the last several years, the Bureau's moved to selling firewood and Christmas trees online. The public, it seems, has responded very well to the convenience of this system, and since we put the system in place, our sales of these products have essentially doubled in the state. On Bureau-managed forests, we continue to see large amounts of defoliation from spruce budworm, as Bill mentioned. We're going into the 3rd year of that epidemic. We also observed increased mortality from spruce beetle and Doug fir beetle, possibly linked to stressed trees from drought and defoliation. Our fuels program across the state in Wyoming treated approximately 12,000 acres in forest and woodland ecosystems in 2021. The primary objective of our fuels program includes reducing conifer encroachment within aspen stands and in sagebrush forest thinning to increase forest health and vigor, reducing the fuel loading in order to decrease wildfire risk. The BLM looks forward to continue to work with our state and federal partners and private industry to manage towards a healthy, productive, fire-resilient, and sustainable forest. Thank you for letting me speak before you today. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Committee questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman Eklund, Chairman Boner, and members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Deb Okeson. I'm a Deputy Regional Forester for the Intermountain Region, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you. And I want to thank Bill Krapser for the opportunity to be here and for being such an outstanding partner. And it's also a pleasure to be here with my colleagues from the Rocky Mountain region. So the Forest Service Intermountain region includes all or portions of 4 national forests in western Wyoming covering over 3.8 million acres: the Ashley, Bridger-Teton, Caribou-Targhee, and Uinta-Wasatch-Cache National Forests. The Forest Service manages these national forests for multiple use, including timber production, livestock grazing, minerals extraction, outdoor recreation, and protection of cultural and heritage resources, clean water and air, and fish and wildlife. In the state of Wyoming, we administer 418 grazing permits, 4 ski area permits, and 235 outfitter and guide operations. The estimated annual visitation of national forests in western Wyoming is approximately 2.2 million visitors annually. As a region, we work closely with state, local, and tribal partners to determine how to manage our national forests and serve the public. We support decision-making at the local level and encourage forest supervisors, district rangers, and our employees to work with the communities they serve. We value the positive relationships we have with our state and local partners and are working to re-engage state face-to-face with many individuals and groups that we have only seen virtually over the past couple of years due to the global pandemic. The Forest Service recognizes that overgrown forests, drought, climate change, past fire suppression policies, and growing development in the wildland-urban interface have contributed to a wildfire and forest health crisis. Accelerating restoration of degraded forests and rangelands to address the growing threat to public health and community safety from uncontrollable wildfire is USDA's top priority. In January 2022, the USDA Forest Service released a new 10-year strategy for working with partners to dramatically increase fuels and forest health treatments by up to 4 times current treatment levels. We are currently working with states, tribes, and other partners to identify local, regional, and national treatment priorities, focusing specifically on areas where catastrophic wildfire presents the greatest risk to infrastructure, municipal watersheds, and communities. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, Congress made a historic investment in wildfire risk reduction and ecosystem restoration work. The legislation will provide the Forest Service, states, tribes, and other federal land managers with about $5.5 billion to invest in improving forests and rangelands. The new funding will allow us to invest in our workforce and dramatically increase fuels treatments. Building workforce capacity in federal and state agencies, industry, and other organizations is critical if we are going to accomplish the work at the scale that is needed. To help us be successful in implementing the 10-year wildfire crisis strategy and bipartisan infrastructure law in Wyoming, there are several notable actions that we are taking as a region that are currently underway. I'd like to discuss just a few. The Forest Service is working to increase our internal workforce capacity in mission-critical areas using new streamlined hiring processes. Our focus is on building our fuels organization and hiring key positions such as grants and agreement specialists, foresters, and engineers. Through shared stewardship, the Rocky Mountain and Intermountain regions and state of Wyoming are working to identify common goals and priority landscapes where we will focus our work. This includes looking at cross-boundary opportunities. As part of this effort, we are working with multiple state agencies and using the best available science. At the conclusion of this process, we will have a better strategy for determining where and how to place treatments on the landscape. We continue to increase the pace and scale of active forest management through Good Neighbor Authority. Multiple shared Good Neighbor Authority forester positions exist statewide, and we are working to add a position on the western side of the state. In 2021, the Forest Service and Wyoming State Forestry implemented 2 timber sales: the Cow Camp Salvage Project on the Pinedale Ranger District and the Fire Trail Murphy Creek Project on the Grays River Ranger District. I'd like to provide you with an update on our regional forest products and fuels program. We are continuously seeking ways to increase the pace and scale of treatments. For example, there is ongoing collaborative work in the Lincoln County and Sublette County collaborative groups funded by the Governor's Task Force seed money to identify future vegetation management opportunities in those counties. This includes a planning effort with the Sublette County Collaborative, Bureau of Land Management, and Wyoming State Forestry to mitigate the effects of a significant blowdown event in the west side of the Wind River Range. The proposal may contain potential salvage harvest, fuels reduction, and clearing of roads and trails. Annually, Wyoming's contribution to the yearly timber accomplishments ranges from approximately 7 to 10% of what is sold in the region. The timber sale program in the Intermountain region provides relatively small, although important, benefits to local communities, and the National Forests in Wyoming play an important role in delivering those benefits. For example, in fiscal year 2021, the Bridger Teton sold 7,314 CCF. For fiscal year 22, most of our sales will be offered in the 4th quarter. We are currently sitting at 19% attainment for the region. We are working across state lines with our timber sales in Utah on the Uinta-Wasatch National Forest to produce significant volume that is being processed by South and Jones Mills in Evanston and Mountain View, Wyoming. 7 sales occurred in 2021, and there are 15 additional timber sales planned throughout 2026. as part of the UN Wasatch Cache National Forest 5-year vegetation management plan for restoring and sustaining healthy forests. With respect to our fuels program, we consistently meet or exceed our hazardous fuels targets, and again, much of that work is accomplished here in Wyoming. We achieved over 100% of our assigned hazardous fuels targets from 2016 through 2020. In fiscal year 2021, we treated 8,141 acres in Wyoming. I'd like to briefly talk about fire. In 2021, we had minimal wildfire activity in western Wyoming. However, fire suppression continues to be a major priority for the agency as we experience record-setting events and longer fire seasons. We are committed to using all available tools and authorities available at the right time and in the right places. In addition to timber, fuels, and fire management, I'd like to highlight some of the other important work we are doing in Wyoming, specifically in our range and recreation programs. As a region, we are focused on strengthening these programs, which is vital to the communities we serve. Between FY 21 and 23, the Intermountain region competed for and received over $6 million in funding through the Great American Outdoors Act. This funding is being used to support recreation projects, including improvements to signs, campgrounds, roads, water and wastewater lines, parking lots, trails, and bridges. To date, we have completed or initiated 16 projects in the state of Wyoming. We anticipate additional funds in FY 24 and 25. These projects create jobs and improve recreation opportunities throughout the state. The Intermountain and Rocky Mountain regions are working together in multiple areas, such as our range programs reviewing an MOU renewal with Wyoming State Department of Agriculture for implementation of the Wyoming Rangeland Health Assessment Program, as well as lands programs working together to evaluate reservoir permit fees and to ensure consistency across both regions. This concludes my prepared remarks. I want to thank you again for the opportunity I've had to talk with you today, and I look forward to continued positive and productive working relationships with the state of Wyoming. We strive for healthy, diverse, and resilient forests that provide current and future benefits to the people of Wyoming and of the United States. There's no shortage of work to be done, and we know that to address the increasing demand for action, we must work together. I welcome any questions.
Committee question, yes. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hobison, appreciate you being here. I was very grateful to hear about the collaboration and how you're going to be working better with communities and the local environment, especially the part about the blowdown over on the west side of the state. I've been in that. It's a vast waste of resources not to do anything with it. I don't think a rabbit could get through that blowdown right now. It's just no way to even hike through it. But my question is about right-of-way permit fees. There are 3 reservoirs at the base of the Uintas that were built 60 to 80 years ago on the National Forest. And historically, the ranchers, it's called the Interstate Irrigation Canal District. They've been paying about $260 a year for many, many decades. Mm-hmm. This year, the rental or the permit or the fee for the right-of-way has gone up to $10,000. That's a $4,000 inflation rate in 1 year, or 4,000% inflation rate. Now, I understand inflation is high. I think it's a policy decision by the current administration to have high inflation. But isn't that a little ridiculous? And is there anything you can do to alleviate this dramatic change in right-of-way permit costs for the ranchers in Wyoming?
I can definitely appreciate, I would be very startled to get that kind of an increase in a bill. The way that the fees work on the reservoirs is they're assessed based on the land value. And so they've recently gone through and reassessed, what land would be worth at this point. And so that's where we're seeing an increase. And I know within the Rocky Mountain region, we're trying to coordinate. I would be happy to take note of the particular situation and follow up on that and see if there's any kind of mitigation that can be made or if that is in fact correct. But I believe that the adjustment, to my understanding, and Jackie, correct me if I'm wrong, is statutory.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, we've been told by the appraiser that it's the market value based on exclusive use. As if the ranchers are building a summer cabin there, they have to pay the exclusive use cost of that property. But my concern is this is not an exclusive use. There's actually campgrounds in the area, concessionaires that are actually, I believe, paying the United States Forest Service for their operations of these campgrounds. And so the Forest Service webpage, it actually says this timbered campground is popular for the local fishing and is close to the lake. You're advertising these lakes as recreational lakes, and you're receiving benefit besides the right-of-way permit fees. So it just is not, I can't understand why they're being asked to pay as if it's an exclusive use for that property. If this is the case, could they fence those reservoirs and keep everyone out because they're paying total right-of-way for exclusive use? But following up with that, your own handbook, Forest Service Handbook, Title 31, Chapter 21, on page 9 of your handbook, it says, the following are exempt from use fees. And number 3 is agricultural, irrigation, and livestock watering system easements. And in Chapter 22, 3122, it says, full waiver is allowed for the specific use if it is in partnership with the Forest Service to accomplish a public service project. And my point here is these lakes have been there for 60 to 80 years, and it's not an exclusive use by the ranchers. The Forest Service is receiving benefit aside from the ranchers storing water there. It's a beautiful place, beautiful area, timbered, great campground, great fishing. To put that burden totally upon the ranchers, I think, is unfair. And to raise their fees from $260 a year to $10,000 a year it's just unfathomable for me. So is there anything that you can do for this? I will
definitely look into it. The Land and Minerals Program reports to me within the region, and so I will ask the director to look into that exclusive use provision and see if there isn't some adjustment that could be made.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, your turn.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deb. Chairman Boner, Chairman Eklund, and members of the committee, always a pleasure to be here with you, and I really appreciate you having us spend a little bit of time with you today. I really want to recognize Bill Crapser. He is really an excellent state forester, and we are very appreciative of the relationship we have with him and his staff. Always good to be with BLM, and of course, my counterpart from Region 4. So thank you. So when I say I represent Region 2, or the Rocky Mountain region, of course, you know, that is most of Wyoming, except for the BT. And then we also have South Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado. So we cover 5 states out of our regional office. For the forests that we manage here in Wyoming, of course, you have the Medicine Bow Route and Thunder Basin, and Russ Bacon is here with me today. I think you all know him. We do have a new forest supervisor up on the Shoshone, and that's Diane Taliaferro. And she'll be starting, I think she'll be there within the next couple of weeks. So she's taking over from Lisa. So that'll be a change for all of you here in Wyoming. And then we have Andrew Johnson up on the Bighorn, and of course, Jeff Tomac, who works between Wyoming and South Dakota for the Black Hills. So that's the area that we have. And so it's a pretty big part of what happens here in Wyoming, and we recognize the importance of that for all of you. Bill laid out and did a really good job, as he always does, of talking about the conditions of the landscape here. You know, it's volatile times. I've been, 2 weeks ago, I was driving from Cody. I was up there in a meeting, and it was, I had snow. We had 80-some degrees the day before. Then we had the snowstorm that hit. And then, you know, then we had a couple inches of rain right along the border. And we're just seeing these really very huge variations in what's happening out there. And of course, that impacts us on every front, from forest health with the bugs and the impacts to the beetle outbreaks and what that does to the landscape, and then the fire situation. we're in uniform today because we had the pre-season fire brief with the governor, with Bill and his folks. And this season's probably going to be challenging for us again. You know, the 2020 was a big year with the Mullen fire, and we're still doing repair work in that area, and have continued and have additional work planned with Wyoming Game and Fish, I think, for cheatgrass control. You know, the fires have a multitude of effects on the landscape. It's the immediate thing that you see with the impacts to the burned trees, the loss of grazing, perhaps, depending on where the fire's at. But then we have the after effects, and that is dealing with things like cheatgrass. So, you know, part of what's so great with Wyoming and the federal partners and the state partners is that we are getting a lot of work done, whether it's on the upfront side or the after the impact side. But just want to recognize that. We do have some exciting news for the Medbo route. This year we received a little over $2.8 million for a Joint Chiefs Award, and that's going to be given to the Medbo route to work with the state on a variety of work, such as fuels thinning, timber harvest, again, working with invasives, and just overall improvement on the landscape. So that was a pretty exciting win, and that was a cooperative effort, you know, with the state and with that forest. And so we're super excited about that. We also have quite a bit of money that we're working with Bill on with the shared stewardship and the Good Neighbor Authority. We have 5 positions. I think, I would lose track because it almost changes daily, because we really have been putting some focus and attention to the partnership with Bill on bringing some capacity both that works for the state of Wyoming, but also helps on the federal side to get as much work done as possible across all boundaries. So that's been pretty exciting, and that has been growing the last couple of years. And so we're really looking forward to that. We're also visiting even with BLM, and we have our new state director, I think Mr. Archuleta is here. You know, we're even looking at working even at a higher level with shared stewardship with BLM being a part of that agreement with the state. So lots of good partnerships ongoing and maybe even increasing. I want to talk a little bit about some things that are also happening on the Bighorn. You know, on the invasive side, we've really been trying to put as much attention as possible to dealing with invasives, not just cheatgrass, but management of sagebrush and whatnot. And so the Bighorn has undertaken a forest-wide plan to be able to treat invasives through aerial application. And you know that working again with the conservation districts, local partners, that gets us a lot further than if we were trying to do hand applications. So some good initiatives taking place across the state in regards to that. Timber and fuels. Y'all know that we continue to chase timber production and recognize the importance of keeping our sawmills and our operators operating. So that continues to be a topic of the highest level for us. We recognize the importance of the mills that are in existence today. We recognize the importance of doing what we can to provide them the wood that they need to keep in operation. It is challenging. You all know that. There's probably hardly a day that goes by, because I oversee timber, fuels, fire, range, water, wildlife, but yet the topic I have in front of me almost every day is on the timber side of it and the operations side. Not just for what is here in Wyoming, but South Dakota and Colorado as well. So we continue to work on that, and we'll see where we get to this year, but please know that we recognize the importance of that industry and the importance of that industry to the state of Wyoming and to us as the federal agencies. On the grazing side, we'll see how the year goes. As I said, it's pretty volatile on if it's going to be hot and dry. I think it is going to be hotter and drier, and we know that has impact to our grazing permittees, but our commitment continues to be high to work with them. If we need to make adjustments to find ways that we can provide some relief to them, whether it's adjusting their period of grazing or length of time or rate or whatever. So our commitment to working with folks individually as things come up continues to be a focus for us. And I think my friend Jim McGagnon is back there. And so I will work with him as things come up. And then on the fuel side, you all have heard about the bills money. And so for us in our region, we received a total of a little over $31 million, and that's for the fire reduction work that we have in front of us. 18 million of that for our region is tied to a specific project, but the difference, about 13 million, we have some flexibility to be able to look across all of our region to put that in the highest priority work areas that we've identified. So we're still trying to figure some of that out. And that's probably 10 years of work in front of us. So we're furiously working through where we have work to do. We are working with our state partners and the other feds to figure that out. But that's a very positive thing for us to get that money. It's a little different than our annual budget because we call it no year money. So normally we get our appropriations where we have to spend it in that year. And with this bills funding, we actually are given, it's either no year money or some of it comes in 4 or 5 years, of a limit. But that's very different from our annual appropriations. So that's very exciting for what we may be able to accomplish in the coming years. So I will stop there and close, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you in the state of Wyoming for being really great partners. Thanks to Bill and our other federal partners. The state of Wyoming is a great state, and we really appreciate the partnership that we have with all of you. So thank you.
Committee questions? Yes, Representative Fortner.
Have you guys took advantage of the wet spring that we've had and started your controlled burns to try to eliminate some of the fuel that's out there for the dry summer that's coming?
So that is a good question. And we were, our prime time period for accomplishing a lot of our prescribed burns is, the winter months when we have snow on the ground, catching some of the spring, opportunity. I think, all of you probably have heard that our chief, Randy Moore, paused prescribed burning May 20th for 90 days to give us a chance to work with our research folks to make sure that we're considering all the factors that we need to do prescribed burning in the way that we need to do it. It is a critical tool. And we are going to have to use it. And so we're doing a little bit of work on that right now. But for us, we're at that spot where it's not going to be hugely impactful to us to move forward because of the timing, because we are getting into fire season now. And so we kind of switch from the prescribed fire into fire response. And hopefully when we get through that period of review, we'll be able to utilize it even better than we have in the past. So, and I think we will. I think we will get there.
Thank you,
Go ahead,
Mr. Co-Chair.
Senator.
To the regional forester, I've got a couple of questions. Since we have all these beetle kill areas and stuff, do you fast track timber sales in those areas? Because there's a limited time frame, maybe a couple of years before that wood starts splitting and cracking. So it's a limited time frame. Because there's a lot of areas where there's thousands of acres that could be utilized if it was fast track and let's get in there and cut however many million board feet or whatever. And then I'll have another question.
May I? So great question. And we have lots of options on the table that we can look at depending on the area, what is the designation? If it's just NFS, National Forest System lands, you have options tied with that. We can do what we call a CE, a categorical exclusion, which is, I won't say fast track, but it's a very limited, specific environmental review. And we can do a certain amount of acreage under that, and it goes very quickly. Then you have your EAs or your EISs, environmental assessment or environmental impact statement, which those are the ones that get more lengthier. And that would be if you're looking at a broad landscape, a large number of acres and whatnot. So what we try to do is look at what the need is. So you're right, there is a limited time that timber is viable for sale, and we recognize that. So, a lot of times right after a fire, we'll go in and do that assessment and see if we can do the salvage sale. And we have avenues to be able to review appropriately to still ensure we're doing the right thing on the landscape, but be able to move through while that timber still has that marketable value. And so we have tools available. We have ways to do it. We're struggling like everybody else. I mean, one of the benefits of working with the state of Wyoming to get these positions in place is it allows us to get some of that work done. So I think we're all on board and recognize that need. And it's just a matter of us being able to get to it in light of a lot of other things that seem to be taking our time.
A couple follow-ups. I get what you're saying. How often do you utilize that? How often do you do that?
A lot, actually. I would say if you, as I said, I have Russ Bacon and actually his deputy Leslie with him today with me. And the Medbo route utilizes the CE authority quite a bit, numerous ones each year. And as does all of the forest in Wyoming. We're working, there's two ways to slice the apple, right? So you can do the CE very specific, focused on maybe a smaller area, or you can do these landscape analysis like the Lava Project, which is, I think, 288,000 acres, Russ? Did I get that right? Somewhere, yes. So, sorry, I have to look at my crew in the back, I apologize. But, so that covers 288,000 acres, and what falls within that landscape, then, they've got different pieces of project work to do. So we're coming at it from all angles. Really are trying to get to it. And it's just what is the right thing on that piece of property.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, my second question, whenever we do, because I was involved in several with BLM and Forest Service RMPs, it seems like they do it every 10, 15 years, whenever it is. The thing is, then they follow up with a travel management plan or whatever. And they're always closing roads. I know up in our area, west of Cody, Sunlight, Crandall, North Fork, South Fork, every time we had one of them, they closed roads. And much to the disdain of the locals that use those roads. Now with the federal emphasis on recreation and getting out there, are they going to reopen any roads, or are they going to push for that? Because that's a real sore point out there when you've utilized a road in the forest for however long, 20, 40, 50 years, and then suddenly the latest RMP, they close that road, and you're not happy. Because when people are young, maybe they walk out in the forest or ride a horse, but older they get, maybe they can't do that anymore, and they want to be able to drive on those existing roads, and suddenly they find them closed. It's a real issue. Do you have any comments on that?
May I, sir? Thank you. You picked the one area of Wyoming that I have had multiple conversations about for travel management in that Cody area. It has come up quite a bit actually in the last 6 months. And you're right, there are a lot of strong feelings up there about, not having enough access, not having enough roaded access for folks. But you have the other side of the coin of folks who believe that, we're doing damage by not managing the travel management across the forest. So, and the conundrum, that's one of my favorite words, conundrum, is that it is, it's a forest that's 80% wilderness. So you have limited opportunity where you can really have motorized access. So we are entering into a discussion about how to look at travel management for that forest in particular, and make sure that there is a balance, right? So that we do provide that opportunity for folks to be able to access those areas responsibly with motorized, with vehicles or whatever is the appropriate motorized avenue. But so we anticipate we'll probably be kicking that off within, I'd say, this next year. Once Diane gets in place, the new forest soup, that's one of the first things we've already talked to her about, that recognizing the need.
That's my point exactly. There's, most of that forest is wilderness. So there is a very limited opportunity for these roads. And a lot of these roads, one of them up there, Sweetwater across from Elks Fork, was 3 miles up through that. Everybody used that thing. And the Forest Service did not manage the road, their culverts, their whatever. And so as the culverts washed out, we got to close the road because you can't make it up the road. And so we have limited, very limited, it's not like the Bighorns. There's a lot of roads up there that you can utilize. Our area, there's so very few, and then you're closing so many of them. It's a real sore point up there. So I'll stop.
There it goes. Yeah, they might have the same beef in the Bighorns, that they don't have enough roads, because I remember a conversation we had about trying to get some beetle kill out of the Bighorn Mountains, and it was wilderness area and the roads were closed, and they could sell the timber, but they couldn't get it out. So, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This might be a question for all of you. I hear second and third hand that we are having definitely big troubles with our sawmills and keeping them open, especially up in the northeast corner. I think they own quite a few different sawmills, so that might include much of your region. Is it true that they're going to be shutting down? And I would hope that we're doing all we can to keep them going, but that's what I'm hearing. Should ask the representative right beside me. It's his area.
Chairman? Go ahead. So we're in stressful times, no doubt about it. And and Bill Crapster and I have had multiple conversations. We're really, again, trying to look at this, working with multiple folks across multiple states right now. Nyman Industry is a predominant mill operator. So he operates here in Wyoming, South Dakota, and in Colorado. So he's important, to 3 states. Well, and actually, he bought the new mill out in Oregon. So they are true operators and really critical to the industry on many fronts. So we're working on it. Part of we have to work through our capacity here within the region, but we are working even broadly nationally on this idea of a transit program. So, historically, we never or often have not had good alignment with, so the fires that you mentioned, where we have a fire go through and there's a lot of impacted trees, and sometimes industry is in that area and sometimes industry isn't. California is a great example of that. So you have this misalignment of opportunity for wood and not necessarily the mill operations that can take it, in that location. So we're working nationally to see if we can come up with a transit program to move excess wood from areas, but we're working with state foresters across the line to make sure we're not going to bring bugs into, to these states. Like if we're moving wood from California, there's some pests they have there that you really wouldn't want brought into Wyoming, right? I mean, it's fascinating when you get into the bug discussion of the differences, geographically that occur. So we're working with Wild Turkey Federation, multiple regions, multiple states to see if because we think that could buy us some help for these mills while we figure out what our capacity is and what we can sustain. This would give them the wood that they really need to keep at the operational level that they have to have to maintain their current structure. So we're coming at this a couple of different ways also. And we're hopeful with Wild Turkey Federation getting involved this last month of trying to help us solve it. We think there may be some really significant movement on that. So we recognize the mills, we recognize our need to keep them if at all possible, up and running, and we'll see what we can do.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's a question, but it's good to hear this, but I hope we're doing all we can because it is so vital, to our obviously to building houses. We've got to figure out how to keep our lumber mills going.
I agree. I think we all agree. Yes.
Yeah. Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, you mentioned Good Neighbor Authority, and question for anybody who wants to take it, I guess, is, I remember that when that bill went through the legislature, is there anything else we can do to help, expand upon a successful program there?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, I think the two bills that the legislature passed, one authorizing the positions that were federally funded, and then this last time where you did put some money in to help support those positions, I think made great steps. We do have, as we said, we have the positions filled. Last year, we did have one of the positions up in the Black Hills, and actually on the Bear Lodge Ranger District, I think our good neighbor forester, working with the Forest Service, I think our good neighbor forester actually sold more federal timber on the district with state contracts than was sold with federal contracts. And it's really worked, from our perspective, it's worked really good. The problem we had before the positions were authorized is we had our regular day job at State Forestry and trying to also do the good neighbor. We just weren't given it the effort and the due that it really had. So you guys were an incredible support to us this last year, and I think as we move forward, we'll even see some more successes with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So specifically, do you have enough positions authorized? Is there a limiting factor in current legislation, whether it be with the number of positions authorized or the level of funding? Is there an opportunity to further expand the program, I guess is my question.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, I'm trying to think of the best. I work for a state agency, so more people and more money are always a good idea, but that's I think with what we've got with the authorized positions, I think it's a really good start. I think we're really able to support our federal partners, the BLM and the Forest Service. I think as it develops, we may be looking at trying to expand it, depending on workforce, depending on the needs of the forest. But where we're at right now, I'm incredibly pleased with the support that you all have given us and the governor's office have given us on it, and it's really helped us move forward with the program.
Follow up.
And just really quick, I know that every agency's going to ask for more people, more money, but I mean this one seems to have a direct positive impact on our economy and our ability to manage a national resource. And there's very few instances of us being able to really move the needle on this. This seems to be one of them. So appreciate what you're doing. I would distinguish this program from many others in state government because it does have that direct impact on our constituents.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Winter, we haven't heard much from you. Go. It's your turn. Take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to direct my comments to the federal agencies here primarily. My concern over quite a long time has been the quick response activities of the Forest Service and the BLM. And it's been lacking as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's been, most of the timber in the western part of the state has already been burnt. And so hopefully we can keep what we have now with quick response, getting it there and getting it put out, or at least controlling it quickly. But I guess my main question is, are the efforts that are being made by our state forester here, and he has incorporated you folks into that on this quick response, but is it getting out into these other states and other regions? It just seems to me that every year we have fires all summer long, and we just keep losing more and more timber, and it's affecting this state's economy as well as I'm sure others. So could you respond to that somewhat?
If I may? Well, I'll take first shot, and then my partners to the side can go. Yes, I mean, you know, we've all said, and we've talked about what Wyoming brings. And so this level of cooperation, it doesn't exist in every state, not nearly at where we are and have been working with Bill Crapster and his staff. Every season is a little different, and of course, how the season progresses. And again, we've said earlier, it's almost not a fire season anymore. It just fire occurs somewhere in this country almost year round. So it's what is the competition for those resources that you're talking about, that affect our ability to be able to respond. You know, right now, I looked at our national, what we call our situational report today before the fire briefing. There's almost nothing happening right now. So if we had a fire break today, we could call up almost any asset we have nationally and get it here in a response. You get into that July, August, September, October, and it becomes really fierce competition-wise. And so the continued effort that we're all making to increase, you know, the number of firefighters we have, to increase our ability to respond, whether that's by air or boots on the ground, that's going to be a continued effort. And I think we are making headway. You know, the Forest Service, we don't have a let it burn policy. I can assure you that. We want to deal with fire appropriately, especially given whatever resources are at risk, and private property, lives, of course, infrastructure such as power lines or water sources or water, any type of water resources. So, you know, it is something we put a lot of focus to. It is probably well over 50% of my job is trying to figure that out for this region. It's a very, that and timber, those are the two things that I spend probably most of my time on. But I think we are making progress, and partnerships like we have with Bill and his staff really do make a difference.
And if I may, one thing I would add to that is, you know, I think this is part of the reason why it's so critical that we work together through shared stewardship and treat the acres so that we have a defensible area. And when we go in with fire suppression techniques, they're effective. And I think that's one of the things the chief with the 10-year wildfire crisis strategy is trying to do, is to get us to the point where we can defend those important resource values.
Okay. I guess one of the things I'd add, and maybe you could focus a little attention on this season, we had volunteer firemen that were willing to come and put out some fires that were about to take out cabins and houses and what have you in the state. And they just had a tough time cutting through the federal bureaucracy to even be allowed into the fire area. So if you can figure out a way of streamlining that, because we have some other willing partners besides state forestry and U.S. Forest Service.
Mr. Chairman, if I could field that one a little bit. We have been working with the federal agencies and especially the incident management teams on some, what you call strike team type resources from local fire departments. The issue, of course, is on qualifications and making sure everybody's safe, and that's the focus. Also, to Representative Winter's question, one thing I think that where we've been incredibly successful, and I always knock on wood because, as I say, we've been successful, all of a sudden we'll lose a big fire. But the support you all have given us on our single engine air tanker program and our HeliTAC program, I think has been key the last few years. I understand, I mean, in your group up here, Representative Clausen is a firefighter. He has an engine. He'd look for any of you to be on his engine anytime to help him. But I know he's been able to utilize our seats on a couple fires that have been supportive that he's been involved in also. So do thank the committee for all the support the legislature's given us on our initial attack.
Okay, thank you for that report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our federal partners. And hopefully, if we do have fires this summer, Forest Health, I've offered the committee chairman this in the past, but if you have a fire in your area or you have a forest health issue in your area that you'd like to talk about, like to get out in the woods, don't ever hesitate to give me a call. I work for all of you and be glad to go out in the woods with you or get you out on a fire or to our heli base again or whatever to explain to you what we're trying to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is the wild horses. And we have first a report from the LSO staff, I think. Am I correct on this? Okay.
I'm an associate research analyst with the LSO. Today, I'll be giving you an overview of the issue brief provided to you in your meeting materials titled Wild Horse and Burro Management in Other States. And it is on, I can bring it closer. Is that better?
Yeah, get it closer.
Okay. The issue brief is in Appendix 5-01, and you are also provided with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation over the lunch period. I'll briefly give a bit of background information on the extent to which the BLM generally manages wild horse and burro populations in states, and then provide some highlights in terms of what federal, state, and private partnerships and initiatives are taking place. Next slide, please. Under the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971, the BLM and the Forest Service jointly manage wild horse and burro populations. The BLM oversees 177 herd management areas among 10 states, and the Forest Service manages 34 territories across 7 states. The issue brief focused on the 10 states where the BLM manages herd management areas. Next slide, please. This chart, which is also on page 3 of the PowerPoint handout, estimates wild horse and burros on BLM managed land in 10 states, as well as the appropriate management level. And that's what the BLM determines as the population level that can exist in ecological balance with public land resources. And this data comes from the BLM's latest on-range population estimates from March of 2022. The chart also shows over-under population ratios, meaning the degree of balance between the maximum appropriate management level and the current estimated population. So for example, Arizona has 5.67 times more wild horses and burros than the maximum appropriate management level. And conversely, Idaho is slightly under the maximum population threshold set by the BLM. As of March 2022, the population of wild horses and burros living on public lands managed by the BLM is estimated to be over 82,000. And important to keep in mind is that these numbers do not include population totals on reservation lands or in Forest Service territories. The current appropriate management level across all on-range public lands is set at almost 27,000. So given that the estimated total population is over 82,000, there are about 3 times more wild horses and burros than the maximum appropriate management level on BLM lands in the United States. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the BLM has partnerships with correctional facilities in 5 of the 10 states. They partner with state facilities in Wyoming, that would be the Wyoming Honor Farm in Riverton, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, and with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department in California. The BLM collaborates with advocacy organizations in Colorado, Idaho, Oregon, and Wyoming, and these partnerships primarily deal with fertility control. And the BLM also partners with the family-owned Mantle Adoption and Training Facility near Wheeland. The University of Idaho 4-H Extension Program partners with the BLM in a weanling training program, and the BLM is also involved in wild horse and burro events in California and Colorado. In California, the Napa Mustang Days event promotes adoptions, features animal training demonstrations, and promotes public education. And in Colorado, in collaboration with the BLM, they host a horse training and competition program. And next slide, please. In terms of state partnerships, the LSO found that states use a variety of mechanisms to help manage wild horse and burro populations, including intergovernmental agreements, cooperative agreements, contracts, and involvement in coalitions. In Arizona, statute mandates that the state enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the Forest Service to implement Arizona law regarding protection of their Salt River horse herd and to address any other issues relating to the herd. Also, Arizona statute allows the state to enter into an agreement with a private entity to assist in managing the Salt River herd. Per the intergovernmental agreement with Arizona's Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service, both entities agree to fulfill certain responsibilities, and one of which is that the Arizona Department of Agriculture contract with a private entity for short-term management of the horse herd via fertility treatment and monitoring. Another is that the Forest Service fund and organize a collaborative process of interested stakeholders for developing a long-term management plan. Nevada and Utah have entered into cooperative agreements regarding wild horse and burro management. Nevada's Virginia range has been declared to be wild horse free, meaning that the horses are considered feral livestock and fall under the jurisdiction of the Nevada Department of Agriculture. So the department has entered into 2 non-exclusive cooperative agreements to help manage the Virginia range horses, and one is with an advocacy organization that provides fertility control, and one with a nonprofit that addresses injured horses and public safety issues on the range. The cooperative agreement in Utah is between the Utah State University Extension Program, county governments, and the USDA. The extension brings together a network of stakeholders who work to develop action plans and communication strategies for managing free-roaming horses. It's called the Free Roaming Equids and Ecosystem Sustainability Network, also known as the FREEZE Network. And the most recent summit was held in Cody, Wyoming in 2020. There's an upcoming summit in October of this year in St. George, Utah. Utah and Wyoming are both involved in coalitions that work on the wild horse and burro issue. Utah is involved in the previously mentioned FREEZE network, and the Utah Governor's Office participated in the Path Forward. This is a wild horse and burro management plan developed by a coalition of advocacy and lobbying organizations, as well as the county commission offices in Utah and Nevada. The management plan made numerous recommendations on how the BLM could manage wild horse and burro populations more effectively, and the coalition brought this plan to Congress in 2019. Subsequently, Congress appropriated $101,555,000 to the BLM for the wild horse and burro program and specified that $21 million of that sum would be appropriated specifically for the implementation of the Path Forward management plan. And lastly, in terms of coalitions, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department is part of a developing multi-state working group, which focuses on wild horse and burro impacts to wildlife habitat. as well as on developing strategies for influencing the BLM to manage these populations consistent with the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971. Next slide, please. And finally, a notable mention out of New Mexico is the private company Wildlife Protection Management. And they've developed a high-tech system for humanely controlling wild horse and burro populations. The system delivers contraceptives, vaccines, and radio frequency identification chips via no-stress grazing hubs where animals voluntarily come to feed. System can monitor herd health and potential disease outbreaks and track vaccinations and fertility control status. Currently, the system is in phase 2 where facial recognition technology is being pursued. And according to a senior economic development officer at New York State University, the BLM has shown interest in this system, so this may be something we see more of in the future. And that, Mr. Chairman and committee members, is the brief overview of some of the things happening in other states regarding management of wild horse and burro populations. I appreciate your time, and I'll stand for questions.
Questions, committee? Thank you. All right, better look and see what we're doing next. So we have the other thing is a governor's memo. You've got it in your packet. I don't see. Was Kate gonna be here? Kate Barlow? All right, we'll go to the. I thought she was. It's okay. These are the ones. All right. We'll go to the Fish and Wildlife Service. Oh, we've got somebody on Zoom.
Yes, sorry, I wasn't sure if it was my turn or not. My name's Mark. My name's Mark Boschel. I work for Utah's Public Land Policy Office here in the state. It's an office within the governor's office. I was asked to just take a couple minutes and talk about Utah's work on the wild horse and burro front. Kaylee did a great job of summing up what's going on throughout the West. I just like to take just a minute to summarize a couple more things. As you saw, wild horse and burro populations throughout the West are high. They're above the levels established by the federal land managers. There's more horses than the landscape can sustain. Oftentimes it's double the amount of horses, sometimes triple, sometimes quadruple. Right now in Utah, we're over the appropriate management level by about double. This requires BLM to remove wild horses off the range due to their inability to sell these wild horses without restriction, meaning these horses, well, back up, Congress has not allowed these wild horses to be sold for slaughter or for euthanasia for many decades now, which creates a very expensive problem for BLM to manage. Every time the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service removes a wild horse from the landscape and puts it in off-site holding, that's a $45,000 decision to feed and house that horse over the course of its lifetime. So you imagine you take 10 horses off the range, what kind of money we're dealing with just to take care of the horses that are on the range that need to be removed from the range to protect the ecosystem and everything else going on out on the range. So it's a very expensive problem that we have. It takes funding. And for decades, the BLM was receiving around $80 million to manage the wild horse and burro populations. That wasn't enough. They were just barely keeping up with these herds that were 2-3 times the size they needed to be. Kaylee mentioned the Path Forward Coalition that Utah was involved in creating. That coalition joined up with organizations like the Farm Bureau and the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, two entities that are on opposite sides of the spectrum on a lot of issues. They're other members of this organization are the Humane Society of the United States, and on the flip side of that, National Cattle and Beef Association. On most issues, these organizations don't agree on much. But on wild horses, we were able to come together and say, hey, at a minimum, BLM needs more funding to manage wild horses. And by reaching across the aisle and working with some of these organizations, we were able to help Congress appropriate an additional $21 million in fiscal year 2020, $14 additional million in 2021, and an additional $21 million in 2022. This isn't going to solve this problem, but it's going to help. This additional 56 million over the last 3 years is helping BLM implement a fertility control strategy so that when they remove horses, they're not just repopulating. These horses double in population every 4 to 5 years. So if you take any pressure off this work, in 5 years, you're right back where you started. These populations just double that quick. So it's important to keep the money coming. Utah's been quite involved in working across the aisle with a lot of different organizations to reach out to Democrat and Republican congressmen in Washington, D.C. To keep this money coming. It's bad for our cattlemen. It's bad for the range. It's bad for sportsmen. It's bad for everybody when there's too many horses out there. So these coalitions are good. Wyoming's done a lot of good work. We're appreciative of what Wyoming's done. Department of Wildlife Resources, Wyoming Extension Office, and Wyoming Department of Agriculture have been quite involved. We appreciate what they're doing. They're great partners. We hope that Wyoming will keep it up and we can keep partnering in the future to get this solved, because it's something that affects everybody, whether we realize it or not. I appreciate the committee's time. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would like to ask, I know that you have a reservation there in the state of Utah, that, being a sovereign nation, has your state looked at trying to partner with them as a sovereign nation to have them doing the slaughtering of wild horses on the reservation? I was just wondering if you've explored that.
It's been explored. I think it was explored years ago. The tribes here in Utah are not keen on the idea of slaughtering horses, and so that conversation didn't go very far. Utah has partnered up with private landowners that are in the vicinity of these reservations to work with them to find ways to remove horses. But as far as slaughter, that's something that in order for us to reach across the aisle and work with some of these animal welfare organizations, in some sense, we've almost put slaughter on the shelf. We've decided, hey, for 20 or 30 years, Congress hasn't allowed slaughter. It just hasn't been something that's been successful. And so we've felt like in recent years, it's more effective to work with these animal welfare organizations to find other means of reducing horse populations, such as fertility control and whatnot. But as far as directly involving the tribes in slaughter, we haven't done that. But we do work with adjacent landowners to remove any feral horses that need to be removed. The Utah legislature appropriated, I think it was $300,000 last year to help with some of this. That's peanuts compared to the problem, but they have appropriated even state dollars to assisting in some of these gathers that need to happen on private lands adjacent to these reservation areas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the starvation rate on the overpopulation you guys are facing right now? 1 out of 10, 1 out of 5? What are we looking at?
I wish we knew. I'm not sure we've got good data on that, to be honest with you. I know what's happening. We've got pictures of these horses out there. You can see every single rib on the animal. They are starving. A big one right now is drought. There's just not a lot of water out there, especially with the drought we had last year here in Utah, at least. And there's a tendency for certain people to go out. Certain animal welfare organizations like to go out and water these horses and fill up troughs when the natural springs dry up and whatnot. And, that's been an issue that BLM's had to deal with. In some sense, there's a compassionate component of that where you don't want to see an animal die of thirst, but at the same time, when you introduce water in areas where there shouldn't be water, you're teaching these horses a habit that is not natural and that they can't rely on next year or whatnot. So that's an issue BLM's having to deal with. But as far as the actual starvation, I don't know. I don't have a number, but it's real. There are horses dying on the range, and it's not pretty when it happens. I'd like to look into that and figure out what those rates are, but don't have them on the top of my head.
Follow up.
What's the starvation rate of other animals out in the plains with the horses? Are you finding a lot of carcasses out there as far as birds, deer, antelope, things like that?
Yeah, well, Utah Department of Wildlife Resources is very concerned with this. We're seeing wildlife displaced. Our natural wildlife don't really mesh well with these wild horses. As these natural springs are beaten to death and the rangelands are overrun at times, it displaces wildlife. They move on or they don't reproduce. They disappear. They go to other areas. They don't compete. Whereas with cattle are managed. They're removed. They're on a seasonal rotation, a pasture rotation, whatever it is, and they're managed. These horses are not managed. They're out there 24/7, eating and drinking, and they always need those resources that oftentimes aren't available, and that definitely has an impact on wildlife. We're seeing it with sage grouse. We've seen it with even deer and elk. They don't blend well, and so there's definitely an interest in managing these horses in a way that we can have thriving wildlife herds in the same herd management areas as these wild horses.
One more question. How long can this continue on before we see permanent damage in our resources on the deserts and places like that where these horses call home?
To be honest, I think we've already seen permanent damage in certain areas. Every area is different, right? Every area gets different rainfall. Every area gets impacted differently. But there's no doubt we've seen permanent and devastating impacts on some of these rangelands. Some of these areas, I've got pictures of springs and water holes that are just beaten to death. You think cows do a number on water holes in riparian areas. They do at times, but these wild horses, they're not managed. They'll sit on these water holes until they're completely gone and everything's, beaten to death. So those impacts are immediate. And if this drought continues, if we have a summer like last summer, I think there is a chance that we'll see large die-offs of these horses. I don't like to say it. I don't take pleasure in that, but it's a real concern. I could see it happening if we have another year like we did last year here in Utah, at least.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, looks like you also had an appropriation in your House Bill 5 to help out with this issue. You mentioned private gatherers. Is that what that funding is going towards, or is there anything else that the state of Utah is doing with that appropriation?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good question. We're doing a lot of restoration work. We just partnered up with state institutional lands here in Utah, our state lands, to restore some of these areas, and vegetation treatments that need reseeding. We've appropriated, spent a lot of this money on restoration projects, because when you do get an area down to appropriate management level and the horses are no longer that immediate threat, you have to go back to work and restore the area, replant some of the native grasses, remove some of the pinyon and juniper encroachment that's going on out there, and redevelop some of the water systems and whatnot. So yeah, a lot of this money is going to restoration work. I would say the majority of it, in fact, is going to restoration work.
Thank you for coming to our meeting. We appreciate it.
Thanks for allowing me to attend virtually. I appreciate that.
Okay. Do we have anyone else online? Okay. So, yes, John, Representative Winter, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, do we not have a BLM representative here today?
I'm sorry.
I have some questions for them, right?
They'll be up here.
Okay, I thought that looked like you over there.
They'll be up here a little bit later. They're kind of down my list, and I'm looking for each of the people on the list and not seeing them here, so. We have no one from the governor's office now. We do have a memo. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, that they were discussing with me that they do have the memo, and there's 2 projects in there for the 500,000 that we appropriated, and so we can have some questions or feedback to them, but they're busy actually getting this put together. And I told them that, and I had the staff member that was running this actually went to work for somewhere else, and they haven't refilled the position. So that's a position I went ahead, so that's all right. They're making progress, and we're not gonna make them spend time at meetings when they're doing stuff and are short staffed. So the memo's there. Long story short, they're looking at about $400,000 for to help with the overpopulation on the Wind River Reservation, and then $100,000 for the Honor Farm to update some facilities there. The idea being that there are certain standards they have to meet and to work with the BLM, and they want to be ahead of that, make sure that those facilities continue to uphold those standards so they can continue the program. It's been very successful. So that's a broad summary. It's in your committee materials if you want to go into more detail.
Okay. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? Oh, yeah. Should be green.
Oh, okay. All right, great, thank you. Yeah, Chairman, Co-Chairman, Committee, we appreciate your time. I'm Pat Nelica with Fish and Wildlife Service out of Lander, Wyoming. Our office assists the 2 tribes on the Wind River Reservation, Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho, with all things fish and wildlife related, and have been doing so for many years, since the inception of the Fish and Wildlife Service in 1941. Of course, feral horses are a huge issue on the reservation, as we've met with this committee multiple times over the last year. And I just want to say, really appreciate this committee's efforts to pass that legislation that allows for partnership and the funding that Co-Chair just mentioned that will hopefully be coming to the tribes, because it will be money well used. So my part of this today was to just speak on the aerial survey that was done on the reservation. If you recall, last meeting in Riverton, this committee was interested and suggested that the tribes do a comprehensive aerial survey to get some baseline information on how many horses are on the reservation. And prior to that, in 2012, Wind River BIA had done a partial survey, but a comprehensive one of the whole reservation had never been done. And so that effort took place in January and February of this year with Mr. Lawson, Tribal Fish and Game, and Mr. Shakespeare's assistance with Wind River BIA. That survey was done, as I mentioned, in January and February, and basically what that involves, and I believe it's in your materials, there's a map that shows the survey routes that we took, and basically it's taking a fixed wing airplane with a pilot and an observer, and then trying to count as many horses as you can on a transect that's basically about 1.5 miles wide, and then repeating that across the reservation. And so, yeah, the map that's on the wall there, you can see the transect lines. They're marked in red, and then all the dots that you see are groups of horses that were observed. And, the first impression when you look at that is you go, wow, there's a lot of horses. And that's exactly what we found. We counted at a minimum of 5,004 horses on the reservation. And again, this is just a minimum count. This is not an actual, because there's a number of horses that are missed when you do these aerial surveys, but horses being large in size and the general openness of this terrain, we expect that we counted the majority of horses, maybe 3/4 or so of the horses. So there's a number above that 5,000, but we're probably in the ballpark as to where we're at with horses on the reservation. And to give you some idea comparatively, the BLM lands in herd management areas encompasses about 4.8 million acres in Wyoming. And there's roughly, as you saw presented earlier, I believe around 4,700 horses on that portion of land. In comparison, on the reservation, we're looking at about 1 million acres, and again, we're looking at similar numbers of horses. So the point being made is that the density of horses on the reservation is much higher, upwards of 5 times higher in total than what you see on BLM grounds. So again, it just highlights the critical nature of the problem that's occurring there. The last thing I was just going to mention is I believe in your materials I also provided a little summary from the Journal of Wildlife Management, which is kind of the leading journal for wildlife professionals like myself. And it's just a nice synopsis of horse management across the West. And from a wildlife manager's perspective, it's just a couple pages if you get a chance to take a look at that. The one thing from that I did want to point out is that the number of feral horses on tribal lands exceeds what's on BLM and Forest Service lands by roughly 30,000. So tribal lands in this document was estimated in 2021 at about 117,000 horses. How they came up with that number, I'm not sure. But in comparison on BLM and Forest Service lands, it was around 90,000. So the efforts that this committee has done to assist the tribes here in Wyoming is very commendable. So with that, I'll turn it over to Art or Leslie, or if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
So we got a question here, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a quick question. This survey and these estimates were after you guys had already gathered quite a few last summer, I assume. So this is after, this number's after, still part of the solution. So just to be clear.
We got about 500 horses. That's after we gathered. All right. Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ben, those horses are on tribal lands. They're trespassing on tribal land, same as private land. Is there any recourse for you guys to take those horses to sell? That would have to be changed at the federal level. Okay.
Representative Worf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do you differentiate between the feral horses and the horses when you fly? How are you separating those two out? You mentioned that they estimated they had 117,000 feral horses, if I understood you right, and you said a minimum of 5,000 wild horses when you flew. How are you differentiating between feral horses and wild horses?
I guess by our definition, any horse that's out there that's not, branded and is not legally there in in a lease kind of situation that is run through the BIA would be considered a feral horse. And so the 117,000 that I mentioned is just, again, I wasn't involved in that little write-up that I provided that looked at, the situation across the West. So I'm not sure how they came up with that number exactly. But again, the 5,000 or so specific to Wind River came from this aerial survey that we did. And I forgot to mention that the Wind River BIA had paid for that, so we really appreciate their efforts as well.
So just a question. Since they're all considered feral, they're not horses that are legally out there leasing land to be grazing, can they all be removed from our reservation? Mr. Shakespeare's probably got an answer for me there.
Mr. Chairman, the answer to that question would be yes. And just a follow-up to Representative Warp's question, we do keep permits for horses out on range. Currently, right now, only one individual has permits to have horses out on range. So all the horses that were counted on there were outside of that range unit where it was permitted.
Representative Fortner.
With the overpopulation of the horses as bad as they are, how long do you think it'll take before the sage grouse habitat will be gone and we'll be listing the sage grouse as endangered species because of the horse?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I can honestly say we do assist the tribes with counting and managing sage grouse on the reservation. And there's about 35 leks that we, the breeding grounds that we monitor every spring. And they're at the lowest that I've seen in 30 years. Whether that's specifically related to the horses, it's hard to show cause and effect there, but no doubt it plays into it. So sage grouse are cyclical. They do go up and down in relation to how much moisture, they follow precipitation cycles. But certainly horses are having a major impact out there. Where the majority of the horses are, or the highest densities of horses are in areas where there aren't a lot of sage grouse to begin with, at least on the reservation. So, but still, they're having an impact, no doubt.
Okay. Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I understand correctly that the reservations are subject to the Wild Horse and Burro Act as well as the BLM and Forest Service?
Mr. Chairman, no, actually the tribes they do not fall underneath the Wild Horse and Burro Act. And so that just applies to BLM and Forest Service ground. And so because of that, the tribes are able to manage horses pretty much they're not restricted in how they manage their horses.
Follow up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, then what is the bottom line why you're not able to remove them?
We are removing some right now. Within the year, we removed 1,000 horses so far. And what I do is hire tribal contractors to come in and round them up. So within a year, we did over 1,000 horses. And so I'm paying tribal contractors to come and get them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you hauling these to Canada or Mexico?
Both.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Shakespeare.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up to Representative Winter's question, the reason why there hasn't been any removal is the Bureau of Indian Affairs doesn't have a standard budget for horse removal. And so all the removal management efforts have fallen upon the tribes, and the tribes up until this point didn't have a proactive removal process.
The $400,000 would help towards removal, correct? Okay, that's where we're, any other questions? Okay, or Senator French.
I can figure out the button. Are the tribes trying to, you said you removed 1,000 horses. Do you have a management level that you're trying to maintain the horse herd on the reservation at?
Yeah, right now we're trying at least to get half of that. Tribes put in $100,000 into the removal of horses and what we made off the sales of horses. So we put in actually about $200,000 into the removal. So everything that we make, we put right back into the program. And so the rate that we're going at, we want to at least get half, because there's 5,000 horses. There's probably 1,000 colts out there running around now.
Okay. Mr. Shakespeare.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a follow-up, for the purposes of the project that was submitted to the Wyoming Governor's Office for the money that was appropriated, bring up the map again with the density map, if you please. So we submitted that project areas in the western Elk Creek Mountains. That encompasses roughly 420 20,298 acres, which is 3 range units. Now, our range units in that area aren't fenced, they're all free range. They all have separated by drainages or topography. So the highly densified areas with the horse count shows, that at this level, that's why the reason why we picked this project for that specific area. Now, those range units have roughly 20 permittees, and they're permitted a maximum of 300 cattle. But all those permits are not filled right now. That roughly equals 6,000 cattle. There's last cattle count, we had 3,000 cattle out for those 3 range units. And so we're able to do a comparison for the purposes of the project. The herd management levels that we were looking at for those areas, for each of those range units was a minimum of 70 horses and a maximum of 100. So, and with the count, there was 1,700 in one of the areas, 900 horses in another, and another 900 horses in another area. So that brought the total to about 3,500 horses, where we only have 3,000 cattle in that area. So that was one of the reasons why we selected that area, because of the high density of horses and the amount of permittees that we have, because right now they're not able to maximize the permits that they have that they've been granted.
And I would guess that's because there is no feed to put any more animals out there.
Yes.
Representative Fortner.
The guy from Utah that was on earlier, he said, I'm trying to get a handle on it, it said something about $45,000 for every animal removed. Is that $45,000 a year for that animal, or is that $45,000 for the lifetime of that animal? Can you guys tell me?
Mr. Chairman, I believe you said for the life of the animal. And I was looking at some statistics recently, and I think annually the BLM spends about $57 million a year or so feeding and maintaining those horses that have been pulled off the range. And so it's a significant amount of money, for sure.
So do we have further, I don't know if you gentlemen are through, but if you had further testimony, I think that's helped us out quite a bit. It seems to me this is one area we can focus on and at least try to get the numbers down to a reasonable number. My guess is 50% is the best you could do. and with the numbers you can find, it looks like a vast territory.
Yeah, what we wanted to do, we did receive the funding, is hire professional contractors to come in and do a bigger removal. So we're looking to remove, within a week or 2 weeks, 1,000 or so at a time. So the more we remove, and the more the tribes get paid, we just keep putting into the program to keep removing the horses. And one of the biggest concerns too is the State Game and Fish came and contacted me, is that, on that map, that's pretty close to the reservation boundary, the state side in the East Fork, and they're concerned about, the horses crossing that creek and heading over on the state side.
Okay. So the $400,000 will continue to be reused as you get income from removal of these horses. They don't just go into a feeding program.
Yeah.
How long can this last? How long can you continue removal?
Well, with the rate with the professional contractors, I would give it at least 2 years. They would have a majority of the horses removed.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Chairman. One last question. When you guys get down several thousand head, what would be wrong with just herding some of the horses out of the reservation over onto the reservation, eliminate them as well?
I'll let Mr. Shakespeare answer that
one. We're coming up with a plan. We had none before. Okay. Any other questions? And we appreciate your gentlemen Who? Oh, staff.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to confirm, well, there's two things. I wanted to confirm, I think that Mr. Nilica may have two separate materials. You were referring to one that had something about the 117,000 versus the 90,000, a separate material, and we only had one, and I didn't know if
Oh,
you had a
okay.
separate material, and I wanted to indicate that we could, because I know you had copies of it, and we could pass it out, and then we could get it electronically. Is there a second material?
Yes, sorry, I thought I had sent that to you, but I do have paper copies. Again, it's just a little 4-page summary from the Journal of Wildlife Management, and I have copies here. And
Okay,
can
you
provide
were
that.
referring, and I thought, we don't have that, so I'll get that out to
Okay.
you, committee, as soon as I can get it from Mr. Nelica. And the second thing is, I think that we have public comment on this topic, perhaps. I mean, on these people, perhaps.
Sure.
I don't know.
Go ahead and bring them on, we may. Are they questions for the committee, or are they questions for U.S. Fish and Wildlife? No, I didn't.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know, but it was just someone who I thought was in, well, it's definitely on this topic, and I believe, and it's Mr. McNiven, who is connected with the Northern Arapaho tribe, so I figured that it might be connected on this specific part of the topic. That's why I just mentioned him.
Okay, we may have other questions for you after this. Go ahead, Mr. McNiven.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. I wasn't quite sure what would be the appropriate time to join in this, but on behalf of the Northern Arapaho Business Council, we certainly appreciate the now House and Rolled Act 45, the monies being set aside, and the cooperation with the governor's office, the plan that has been put in place, and working with, of course, Mr. Lawson and the Tribal Game and Fish, the Mr. Shakespeare with the BIA, and the work that's been done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their survey mapping, and simply wanted to relay the council's, on behalf of the Northern Arapaho Business Council, the appreciation of this work to reduce those feral horse numbers out there on the range to improve that, to improve the riparian and ecology of the landscape there. So simply saying thank you, expressing council support for the parties involved, and would be happy to entertain any questions, but certainly know the support and thanks for the previous presenters to the committee.
Committee questions for Mr. McNiven? Okay, thank you. So, did you have anything further to add to what we're, the conversation? Okay, I think we'll move on. So, that was, Mr. McNiven was, I believe, Northern Arapaho rep. Did we have a Eastern Shoshone rep? Okay. No. Okay. I think we are now ready for the BLM, huh? Yeah, that was, we don't have game. We had, that was him, US. All right, go ahead. All right, Mr. Archuleta.
Well, Chairman Boner and Chairman Eklund, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you all and the rest of the committee members. Some of you I've met, some of you I haven't. I am 3 months into the job and looking forward to the opportunity to work in with all of you. You know, wild horse and burro is one of the many things that BLM manages under our multiple use mission, and one of the items that creates a lot of challenges and opportunities. Kaylee did an outstanding job and covered some of the general material that I was going to cover, so I'm going to skip over that and just get right to the point here of BLM specific topics or BLM specific information. So here in Wyoming, there are currently 16 horse management areas that we manage on nearly 5 million acres of land. 4 of the 16 HMAs overlap the checkerboard land pattern of alternating private and public lands in the southwest part of the state. And obviously that checkerboard land creates a lot of challenges for us where we have BLM land interspersed with private land. In all, Wyoming's 16 HMAs have the capacity to support up to 3,795 horses, and that's what you heard a bit ago. And at this point in time, we believe there are about 4,734 horses on the landscape. So we're about 1,000 horses over capacity, which compared to a lot of the other states that you saw, compared to the reservation, the Wind River Reservation, not really entirely in bad shape at all. But a lot of that was due to the fact that in January we had a fairly significant roundup, very successful roundup in the Rock Springs area. We were able to remove 3,500 horses from the landscape from 5 different herd management areas. So just really appreciate the committee's support and the state's support in those efforts to do that roundup. You know, I do want to say that capacity is becoming a big issue for us. You've heard in some of the other testimony that, you know, it's not cheap to house those horses, and we send those horses to different facilities here across Wyoming as well as other states. And with that roundup, basically, we filled up all of our facilities for the most part. You know, I'll come back to that in a little bit, but last month, we also released a final EIS for wild horse management in the Rock Springs area, out of the Rock Springs and Rollins field office. The public protest period for that EIS actually ends today, and the governor's 60-day consistency review will end on July 5th. That EIS addresses 4 horse management areas in the Rock Springs, Rollins area, and it really looked at some alternatives that would really provide us with some better tools to manage horses in that checkerboard landscape. And so, you know, we'll be working through any comments and protests here, but hoping that we can implement portions of that EIS or all of that EIS and continue to be effective with horse management here. Then one of the last things I wanted to say related to capacity is last month, BLM and the Honor Farm completed a really successful wild horse adoption in Riverton. The Honor Farm hosted 250 potential adopters, and they adopted out 55 animals. We only offered up 56 animals, and there was an issue with one of them. So basically all the horses that we offered were adopted, which was great news. And you know, that just is a reflection of the great work that the Honor Farm does and the training that they do with those horses, as well as just the work with us and with you all to get the word out, to let people know that they're coming in and getting quality trained horses when they come to the Honor Farm. So that's just a great example of our ability to work with you all, and just looking forward to see how we can continue that, how we can increase capacity at some of those facilities. And you know, there was I think a comment earlier about the Honor Farm needing to do a little bit of upgrading of their facilities. We really appreciate your support for them to do that. It's not just true of the Honor Farm, it's our other contract and our facilities as well. We do a health evaluation every couple of years, and there's just some things that we need to continue to improve on those, but nothing out of the ordinary, and we're really looking forward to continuing to work with the Honor Farm. You know, one last comment I'll make, BLM nationally is really looking into various forms of fertility control, you know, because of the expense of housing these horses and the fact that we don't send any to slaughter. We need to find some ways to control them. And, you know, if the thought is if we can get them down to AML, then fertility control can be successful. But at the numbers that are way above AML, fertility control doesn't make a lot of difference, doesn't have a big effect. But we're hoping that here in Wyoming, we're approaching those lower levels and we can really engage in some active fertility control that will make a difference. So I'm going to close with that. I really thank you for the opportunity to come and be happy to entertain questions.
Committee questions? Now's your chance, John. We have a representative that's has a lot of experience in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would apologize to the state director for my previous comments. I didn't realize the schedule. So anyway, Could you comment, please, on the rumor I'm hearing about the BLM shutting down all gathers? I just heard that this morning.
No, Representative Winter, no, that's news to me. We have a schedule for gathers that we put together for the next couple of years, actively working to implement those gathers. Obviously, across the BLM, various years, certain gathers don't happen for various reasons. And, our goal is always to move those funds to other areas. But no, we're moving along, trying to implement that schedule. There may be some budget issues associated with doing all of the ones on the schedule, but no, there's, as far as I know, no interest in shutting down those gathers.
Follow up? Yes, please. Thank you. I guess I'm glad to hear that, but I am concerned about the range condition in the Rock Springs gradient or district. I don't know if you've had a chance to get out there and look, but it is. I think we have lost, or on the verge of losing, so much range out there that it's really unforgivable. I mean, the BLM has a mandate to take care of the range, and it hasn't been done. And so I would hope that you could, with your tenure here, you could turn that around and make things better for the state of Wyoming.
I appreciate that. That's a really difficult situation there because we have HMAs placed over the top of the checkerboard land as if there were no checkerboard land. I mean, it's as if it was solid BLM. And as you all know, that creates some real difficulties for us to manage that area. But what I'm really hoping here is that this EIS, that if we can move forward with that and implement some of the actions in it, it will really provide us some opportunity to effectively manage the horses in that area and reduce some levels even further, and then get on with some restoration work in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I just had a few questions. First, an inquiry about the number of horses, if you have the percentage that do not get adopted or kind of permanently held in the facility until they die. Do you have a number? And then a couple of them, I'll just give them to you in a row if you.
You mean I'm sorry.
So, yeah, so this is the horses that you round up, you put them in your holding facilities, and the Rock Springs facility is quite full, I can report. And I just wondered what happens to those horses? I mean, I heard they go across the country sometimes, but just in particular, do some horses not ever get adopted? That's really one question.
Sure, there is quite a few horses that don't ever get adopted. A lot of times it's just lack of adoptees, if you will. But sometimes it has to do with the condition of the horse, and it's just not a horse that anybody wants to adopt, And so what we do here in Wyoming and most states here within the Western United States is we hold those horses at our facilities for as long as we believe that they're adoptable and in a condition to be adoptable, and maybe a little longer. And then we eventually will transfer them to some of our long-term holding facilities in the Midwest. You asked for a percentage, and I don't have a good feel for what that percentage is. We could probably round up a rough number. And I think what you're asking is the percentage that's adopted versus what's not.
Yes, sir. A follow-up?
Yeah, follow-up.
I'll just put two together. In the Rock Springs, the high desert, I think, district it is down there, there's 1,000 horses didn't get picked up because of, adverse weather conditions or affect the roundup. When do you plan on picking up the extra 1,000 horses? And the second question is, I don't want to take up all the time, is there any issue with the checkerboard with private landowners being adversarial to you picking up wild horses? Because I had never heard that before. So I guess I'd like to know if there's any, if you've had problems because maybe some folks don't want you picking them up. I don't know. I'm just asking. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah. So I'll answer your second question first. I'm not aware of any adversarial situation with us gathering horses in the checkerboard area. really the reverse, with the Rock Springs Grazing Association is adamant that we gather the horses. So I'm not aware that there's opposition to gathering the horses. I've been here 3 months. There, some of my folks back here may be able to better answer that question, but I think I would have heard that or been told. In terms of going back for the 1,000 horses, we really don't have a plan for going back. The way we do those gathers is by a contract, and it's a fixed source contract or fixed amount contract. And so once that contract period is up, we don't have another mechanism to just immediately go in and fix or gather the horses that we weren't able to gather. Basically, it would, it'd be the next round of gathers that where we would collect those horses. Once in a while, we can go after additional funds to do gathers that weren't planned. That may be a place where we try to do that. Those horses move across the state line with Colorado as well. And so we try to work with Colorado in terms of gathering the horses that are still out there. But I think the comment was made earlier that they basically replace themselves about every 3 or 4 years. That's where it's absolutely critical that we are able to do gathers that often in order to maintain the numbers that we're at.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd just like to thank you for what you've done, because I can tell you it has made a difference in the Rock Springs area. It's a noticeable difference, and I'd say it did make an impact. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that.
I guess one of the things, while we're on the subject, is I think now is the time to try to have more gathers, try to get what's left out there, try to, if you turn them back loose, at least sterilize them and not allow it. Because if the next gather's in 3 to 5 years, you're just way behind the 8 ball all the time.
Chairman, you're exactly right. And it's, we need to keep the pressure on right now. And that's a job for me to convince up the chain that we got to keep at this, and I realize there's some states that are in pretty bad shape, but that doesn't mean we should allow ourselves to backslide while we're trying to catch up in some states that it's not going to happen anytime soon. So,
Representative Worf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Archuleta. Can you tell us, and I don't know if you know the number, but the most recent budget that the federal government has on the horses that are held in long-term facilities, do you know what that dollar amount is offhand, or?
Representative, I really don't. Let me. Yeah, we'll get you that number for the committee.
I figured that that's probably a little unfair to ask you, but I would like the committee to get that number. And I guess the follow-up question I have, Mr. Chairman, to that is, I already know because I've looked into this issue long ago, but I know we're spending an enormous amount of money on these horses that, to me, once they're put in a long-term holding facility, they're no longer wild horses or burros. And I guess what I'm asking is, how can we help you get that monkey off your back? Because I'm sure that you would probably rather see those dollars being put to more beneficial use for your budget than to have it just squandered on these horses that really aren't fulfilling anything to do with the Wild Horse and Burro Act. And so I guess that's one thing I believe, as the director of our state, that you can help us only if we help you. And I guess that's one thing I would like to know, is how we can help you get that monkey off your back so that we can start really addressing this problem.
It's a very expensive program. You definitely, you got that right. But it's also a really complex problem. I mean, maybe to some of us, it's very simple, but there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in the whole Wild Horse and Burro program, and a lot of different perspectives. I think one thing I'd like to see us do is continue to work on adoptions, but that is a small percentage of the total number of horses. Not that it doesn't make a difference, it does, and it's a big deal, but a long-term, really what you're asking is a very long-term solution. And And I'm not sure what that is. You know, it was nice to hear the tribal representatives with the solution that they have, something we haven't been able to do for BLM. And I'll just share with you all real quick. I met with a group of middle schoolers, and they had been assigned the question of how do you deal with the wild horse issue. And this was not really, it was a mixed urban, rural middle school group. And I'll just tell you, the solution they all agreed on, which absolutely surprised me, and this was just 3 years ago, they said, we need to be slaughtering those horses. So it's not a generational, there's a lot of different perspectives by generation as well. And so, I just share that with you. I'm sure I could go into another classroom and get a whole different perspective as well, but that one kind of stuck in my mind, to have a group of middle schoolers look at a lot of different alternatives and come up with that one. And, I told them, this is not a new problem, but we need new ways to think about it. And I guess that's what I would say to all of you and to all of us, is we need to try to think of some new solutions and new resolutions to an old problem here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I'm not saying this to be funny, but on the 1,000 you got, can you partner with the tribe over on the reservation and just herd them across the line and be done with it, so you don't have no pre-planning or anything like that? And maybe start a new relationship that way, a new agreement. That's an avenue of maybe working towards a better, bigger solution in the future years. Is there any way we can do that?
I hate to give you this answer, but I'm gonna, and it's an I don't know answer, but those horses move back and forth. And we know they move back and forth, and I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I have a question on the adoptions. So it talked about 4-H kids adopting horses, probably young horses. And I'm kind of thinking most of the horses should be adopted out as younger horses. What happens for somebody who adopts one of these things and really can't ever get it broke, all they do is take it home and feed it? Do they have any alternative? They can't slaughter it, send it to slaughter. I don't know if they can drop it off at the reservation, but probably not legally, but can they bring it back to the BLM?
I've never been asked that question, but my just off the top of my head response would be that they probably could give it back to BLM. That would be the best alternative, but we would definitely want to work with that adopter to try to figure out or look at opportunities to get the horse trained so that they could keep it in the long run.
Okay. Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, I just thought I would let the committee know, Representative Larson just handed me this. This is the handout, the wildlife profession that we got from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it's actually on page 1059, but it's the third one. And it says in 2020, BLM spent $57 million, which was 62% of the $91.2 million spent by the BLM on wild horse and burro program to care for animals in the holding. So that's the number. We're spending $52 million, or 62% of your budget, for wild horse and burro on holding facilities. So it's a substantial number. I knew it was pretty high, but we had that number. I appreciate Representative Larson handing that to me, but.
And that's 1 year.
Yep, that's 1 year. 62% of the budget just for the wild and burro horses.
Any other questions? Yes, you've got a representative. Come on up. Get yourself mic'd up.
Yeah, just let me
Let me
clarify.
introduce. So this is Lori Armstrong. She's my Deputy State Director for Resources. She oversees the Wild Horse and Burro program for Wyoming BLM.
So just a clarification, and I want to make sure I get you an accurate number. I think that is for all of our facilities, not just the long-term. That would be our temporary holding facilities, which is what we have in Wyoming here. So let me get you the number of those long-term facilities in the Midwest. Make sure we get you an accurate number.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I just threw up a flag. So is the number going to be bigger?
Probably.
No. No, I'm guessing that number is the number for all of our facilities, which is our short-term where we put horses once we gather them, and also includes the long-term pastures in the Midwest. So I can get you the breakdown of those numbers to tell what is the temporary facilities versus those long-term pastures.
I don't think so. All right.
Does he have a question for Game Fish?
Yeah, so do you have a question for him? All right. I think you're probably done, or did you have more to bring us? We've got more.
Yeah, just real quick,
Senator.
statement, I guess. I just want to repeat what Senator Kolb said. We do appreciate the significant effort the BLM has made and continues to make to get down to appropriate management levels. And like I said, we're beginning to explore what we can do as a state to help out. And as I've discussed with you before, we want to know what we can do once hopefully the dust settles here, to make sure we don't get back in that position we found ourselves in where we're several times above the AML. So we're focused on state agencies, we're focused on the reservation right now, but in the future, we're looking for opportunities to partner with you to continue to make sure that we manage this resource at appropriate levels. So thank you and look forward to working with you.
Appreciate that, Chairman Boner, and I've said to many others, this is a partnership and we depend on you, and I think you depend on us to get the job done, and we will be looking for those opportunities and definitely come to talk to you about them, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm John Kennedy, Deputy Director for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I really didn't have any formal testimony to provide to you, but I see that Representative Worf isn't going to let me off the hook here. So I would say before, I assume there's some questions for Game and Fish, and that's good. I would tell you that this is a high priority to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. It is to the state fish and wildlife agencies. I have personally worked on this issue for over 30 years through the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And, the observation I would have is, and as the chair of the Wild Horse and Burro Working Group for many, many years, I think it's okay for me to criticize myself, and I'm going to. We really haven't made a lot of progress on this issue. It's very contentious, it's very complicated. We've spent years arguing about whether there's too many horses or too many burros out on the landscape. There is, it's a no-brainer. We've spent years and years arguing whether there's impacts to rangeland health and wildlife. There are, but yet we've continued to make that argument and get in that debate as to how many burros or horses are out on the landscape and whether there's been impacts to wildlife. I think we spent the time, our energy in the wrong place. So, the committee brought up the monkey on the back. I think the biggest monkey on the back right now is who the Bureau of Land Management, and Forest Service has responsibilities too, but I'm going to just talk about BLM in Wyoming because that's the main federal agency with jurisdiction. I think the monkey on the back is the other side. And I'm not criticizing wild horse and burro advocate groups, but it is one side. And I really think there's opportunities to come and meet in the middle a little bit, but they're not hearing from that other side as aggressively as they do from the horse and burro advocate groups. And again, not criticizing them. They're doing a great job. I just think that there's opportunities. So I think that maybe there's efforts to focus on education more, to try to get our sportsmen in Wyoming, for example, aware of the issue. Many didn't know what the horses were doing out there, who's responsible for managing them, that there's a particular area they're supposed to be in. And I know that sounds pretty basic, but I think it's really important so that right now the Bureau of Land Management gets serious opposition just on gathers. And we're talking about aggressive management actions that are allowed in the Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971, like fertility control, like euthanasia of old and aging animals. Those opportunities are available, but we've got to get the other side, I think, a little bit stronger. And so what this committee's doing, I think, is excellent. I mean, you're raising the awareness of the issue. I know Game and Fish, our commission, has asked us to elevate this as a priority in our agency because we are seeing those rangeland conditions that Representative Winter brought up. We're seeing the impacts to wildlife, so we're going to put more time and money into documenting and quantifying those impacts. But when push comes to shove, we need less horses on the landscape right now. They need to be managed. So how do we do that? And I would stand for any questions. I will say the Bureau of Land Management brought up the process they're going through right now to evaluate some of the herd management areas in the state, and Rock Springs area came up as an example. And the Bureau of Land Management is talking about having herd management areas that are overlaid on the checkerboard. That's not, in my opinion, that's not right. So at the time the act was passed in 1971, the Bureau of Land Management was charged with identifying all the herd areas where populations of horses occur in the state. They draw a circle around those populations. Then they were directed to go through a management analysis process, a public process, and working with the state fish and wildlife agencies on what they called manageability concerns to determine whether or not there should even be a herd management area there. That's why there's some herd areas in Wyoming and other states that aren't herd management areas because of manageability concerns. One of those manageability concerns is private land. And to me, having an HMA overlaid on a checkerboard is a pretty serious manageability concern. Anyways, I think that there's maybe opportunities to take a look at herd management areas in Wyoming. And once it's agreed that they should be a herd management area, I think that we need to spend more time on what that appropriate management level is and then manage towards that population. Fertility control is a great opportunity, I think, for us. With that, I'd stand to, I know that was all over the place, but this is a really complicated issue.
When we brought all of the groups together and we had the advocates for horses here, they agreed something finally has to be done. And those advocates were Wyoming people. I don't think they were outside groups. At least it was my understanding they were from Wyoming. And the only thing the fertility control, permanent fertility control, once you get them gathered, was an issue they were fine with. What they're not fine with, the only thing they don't want to do is slaughter horses. And so we probably can't anyway on horses that are on federal lands. But I'm not sure that the checkerboard, I agree.
It's complicated.
Yes, it's very
Mr. Chairman,
complicated.
it is.
But when we brought in the advocates for the horses from Wyoming, I don't think you'd hear this from other states wanting to interfere with how we manage horses in Wyoming. They were good with the fertility control. And that's why if we can get the rest of the horses gathered in Rock Springs and we tried to fertility control on all of those, we would just slow it down from 4 to 5 years doubling to maybe every 10 years doubling. But nonetheless, now's the time to gather.
Mr. Chairman, that's good news too about the fertility control. And again, I want to say, I mentioned this earlier, that's out of no disrespect to the advocacy groups. My point is we just need to work with them. And it seems like the other side, certainly our constituents, are pretty quiet on this issue.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I've been waving at you.
I'm
Thanks.
sorry.
No, thanks. Hey, just mentioning that there is a possibility about discussing the herd management areas. I've never heard that. So where does that begin at? Is that with the Bureau or with Congress or what?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that would be best answered by the Bureau of Land Management, I think. And my point is, I just think that maybe we need to go back and look at some of these herd management areas. They are a huge headache, not just to private landowners, but to the Bureau of Land Management. So as we go through a public process, was my point, I think that maybe if there are opportunities to look at whether or not those areas should even be herd management areas, I think would be time well spent.
Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Director Kennedy, I appreciate you coming up, volunteering to jump up there for us and take this one. But I guess one of the questions that I have, and it comes in part because I don't know the answer, but I do know it was mentioned that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that's responsible with working with the tribes has noted that they have seen probably the lowest number of sage grouse that they've documented on the reservation. And I didn't know if those numbers have the potential to drag the state down. But that's the first question I wanted to have answered. If you can address that, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, so complicated question. It's cumulative. And first off, I mean, right now we've got a pretty significant drought condition in the state, as we all know. That occurs in Wyoming about every 10 years. Yeah. And if you look at the sage grouse populations over time, they're cyclic. And so there are ups and downs, and there's far more impacts to sage grouse than just horses, but they are cumulatively, we believe, causing some impact to sage grouse, but it's very complicated. Drought conditions, there's other impacts to survival and overall productivity of the sage grouse populations. We also have seen that decline right now, but we also anticipate that to go up. And we've seen that trend in the past.
So John, does the number of sage grouse on the reservation play into account as to whether or not the state of Wyoming is at risk of a listing of sage grouse, or does the state pretty much stand on its own where we really don't have the authority over the reservation, but it is within our borders? So I assume that if it causes overall state numbers of sage grouse to go below a certain objective, the state's at risk. And obviously, we can only control what we can control. But I'm just wondering if that's been factored into the risk that the state faces with the potential of a sage grouse listing.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, I would unfortunately need to have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service answer that question. My gut feel on that is no, we're not considering those populations on the reservation, but I could be dead wrong.
I can answer that. So actually, the leks that are counted on the reservation are included in the area which the authority still rests with the tribes to manage the sage grouse. Given that it's 35 leks, all the leks in the state is a minimum number, so it probably doesn't matter. But it happens on the reservation. It happens other places.
But it does, the overall number of birds is impacted by what goes on the reservation as well, from what you just said. So having heard that, John, don't walk away, we're not done. Okay, I just, I really want, and I guess I want to make sure that our director of the BLM is also understanding this, because, and I understand that you can't say that sage grouse declines are solely attributable to the horses being outside their numbers. But if in fact we see a listing of the bird because we haven't been able to get our handle on the number of horses in the state, if that's a contributing factor, I really think we need to be sending the message loud and clear through our congressional delegation that we need to do something, because it has. My biggest complaint is it's 50 years that we've been, playing around with wild horses, and we continue to see a program that has failed chronically. And I worry about not just the sovereign nation of the tribes, I worry about a sovereign state called Wyoming, where I live. And I really see the actions of our federal government leading to the listing of a bird that could have very, very dramatic impacts to our state economy, to our livelihood, and our ability to function. And so I really think we're at that, we've been sitting on a powder keg for a long time, but I really would encourage maybe the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, and the Game and Fish to work on a letter that we can actually send to our congressional delegation and our governor, highlighting the problem that the state has, that we potentially could be facing at least listing of that bird, that the government actually has to shoulder some of the responsibility for that listing. And I just think that it's imperative that we send a very loud and clear message that we are at a crisis. I mean, I don't know how long we wait. Like I said, it's been 50 years this program's been failing. And, I'm to the point where I want the state to just take over horse management, and we'll deal with horses the way we deal with horses. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just I guess, I'm new to this, so bear with me. How is it that the BLM has taken over the horse management area on private lands, when, as I read the act, it excludes private lands and state lands and other federal lands, I think, if I want to quote it right? How is that happening? Because it seems like, I just question is, if you're going to do that, then I think you have to manage that. If that's what is really, if you could explain, please. Thank you.
I'll attempt to explain here. Yeah, so, we don't have authority to manage those horses on private land, but obviously they're moving back and forth. And so I think the point is that HMA was set on top of that landscape without the thought that there is a lot of private land mixed in there. I'm not really answering your question very well, but what we are working on right now, and I think Representative Larson asked this question, is we would like to see those HMAs changed to horse areas where we have more flexibility for management of the checkerboard area rather than under an HMA. So I agree with your comment. I don't know that I'm, we're not really attempting to utilize those private lands as part of the HMA. That's not the point. It just creates an issue for us to gather the horses, to actively gather all of those horses within that area because it is a checkerboard area or mixed private land. I know I didn't really answer your question, and I'm not sure I can do any better than that.
Thank you. So I guess I don't know if we've talked from representatives from other states. Do we have other public comment online? Representative Worf.
Mr. Chairman, I would like an answer. I mean, can the three entities that are here, are you guys willing? I asked a question that was kind of sidestepped, but are you guys capable of writing a letter that you all three sign that is provided to our congressional delegation that we send up to the next administration or this administration, highlighting the risk that are there with horses remaining unchecked.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Worf, at my level, I'm just a project leader assisting the tribes. So I can certainly provide whatever information would be needed to support that letter, although it would be probably above my pay grade to do that. I hate to weasel out of something like that, but it's certainly something that would probably have to go through higher channels. But again, I would certainly be happy to provide any support for something like that at my level.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Worf, Game and Fish can commit to working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Land Management on this issue in terms of impacts to wildlife. If this committee wants to get more specific as to just specifically impacts to sage grouse, then we're going to need to get some data to do that. And we're committed to doing that.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add to that, Representative Worf. I would agree that, we would need very specific data to say that. I think we are having those conversations with our headquarters office about the impacts of, or potential impacts of the horses on wildlife, on the landscape, on vegetation. I think there is absolutely a real concern in our headquarters office about the current situation. Like we've talked about here, not an easy resolution. So kind of not trying to divert from your question, it'd be a difficult letter for us to agree to sign to. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, I guess what I'm going to ask then, and I get it. I mean, this is a heavy ask. It's a heavy lift. It's a big ask. But I think that it's warranted, and I'm going to ask each of you at the table to work together collectively, and I'll do my part to help. I mean, if you need me to make phone calls, you need me to contact people, but I think you need to talk to your supervisors and tell them that the Ag Committee in the state of Wyoming has requested this letter be sent to our congressional delegation with the intent that it goes to the administration. And I think it's that big of a deal. And I get it. I know that it's maybe outside or a little bit higher above what you guys can commit to. But if you'll commit that you'll try to get that done, that's what I think we need to be doing. If we want to be serious about addressing this problem, like I said, it's 50 years of chronic failure. And if we don't do something, it's going to continue down the same path. And so I guess that's something I would, if you need me to send you a letter, I'll get a letter.
Well, I think the letter can come from the Ag Committee.
And if
That
you
much I
need
don't
that,
think we can.
if we need to send you the letter to get this done, I just think collectively it would show a great partnership, and we really probably should include the tribes. They're a sovereign nation in this state as well, and I'm sure that a listing of sage grouse would have dire impacts on them as well.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Worf, just for clarification, what is the specific ask in this letter that you're talking about? Are you talking about just generally the management of horses in Wyoming, that removals need to take place, or that management needs to be at the appropriate management level? If that's what you're asking, we're all on board at Game and Fish.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, I guess, yes, what I'm asking for is I think we have to help the administration and everybody else in Congress understand what is going on. Because, I mean, I think it's crazy when you look at the amount of money we're spending on horses that have been removed years ago that are being held in long-term holding facilities that are no longer remotely any way, shape, or form part of the wild horse and burros. I mean, I don't know how many years you got to be put in captivity before you're no longer considered a wild animal. And I just think if we don't do something, we're going to continue to have the same problem. And I do think, as you asked, Deputy Director Kennedy, that's what I'm asking is we need to tell our story. We need to tell the story that this is not working. And Congress needs to hear it. And that's why I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I think we need to talk about the impacts. And sage grouse, to me, is the one that I'm most concerned about, because obviously if sage grouse get listed, we just spend a lot of time. Some of you heard the conversations we had about oil and gas just on state lands. But if we can no longer do oil and gas leases and coal development in this state, it would cripple this state. And that's what a listing of sage grouse does. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is how do we collectively articulate? We got 3 different agencies here. If we add in the tribes, I mean, that's a second nation. I think there's some power in that, but we gotta deliver that message to Congress. And I think the avenue to do that is a letter to our congressional delegation. If you guys think there's a better avenue, I'm all ears, but I just think we need to do something to highlight the problem. I think Congress is so dysfunctional right now. I don't even know that the letter will get their attention, but it is a problem that I think we as a state need to ensure that we are doing our part to tell Congress that the way they are obligating us all to live with these horses is not working, and it has the potential to have very dire consequences to the people that live here. Is that clear, Deputy Director Kennedy, what I'm asking?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it is. And Game and Fish is committed to working with the other agencies in this committee to get that message to the right place. I don't know what the right answer is, how to do that, but we're committed to working with you on that. We appreciate this committee's support.
And if I can just follow up, I will ask that this committee, that we have a letter that we send to these 3 agencies and probably even the tribes.
Okay.
And ask for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, is this the first time that you've decided to do this, to work with other agencies, or I believe you've been doing it all along? Is that not true?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely. Specifically on this issue, we have worked with the other agencies, not so much the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service when it comes to horse management in Wyoming. It's mainly with the Bureau of Land Management. But our efforts, even specific to horse management, have not always been that strong in the past. I think you're seeing a more emphasized involvement by Game and Fish because we're starting to see real impacts on the ground. Now, we've been working on it, as I've mentioned, for years and years. I just don't think we've made the progress that we maybe could have if we tried to do this a little bit differently, which is why I mentioned focusing on the education and some of the things that this committee's doing.
Thank you.
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so everybody knows, I have a resolution being developed right now on this very situation. And our LSO lady back here, she's going to be heavily involved in that because John Brody is leaving. And so she's right now being involved in it, and I will continue to work with her. And I'd be really happy to work with these gentlemen to make it even better. So, and Representative Worf, if you can be involved, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're done. Do we have further public comment? Do we have anything online? Do we have some other people out there that need to add anything? Can't imagine that we have anything to add, but okay. So concerning this issue, we're going to have a resolution. You're working on a resolution. Representative Winter. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, what did you need from me?
You've got a resolution in process now.
I do,
concerning those
yes.
Wild horses, okay.
Yeah, and the first draft has not been finished yet, but it will be soon.
Okay,
So,
all right.
No,
I think so.
Mr. Chairman, before you adjourn, I still want us to write a letter, that have LSO, and I don't feel like I can do that. I think that's the chairman's prerogative, but I think we still need to have a letter written to all these entities to help support them, because I still think there's a lot to be said about having a letter that's collectively signed by this diverse group. We have been working together, but I don't know that we've ever pulled it all together in one spot. And that's the power I see in having one letter signed by all the agencies saying to Congress, this is a problem, you better pay attention and take note. So I still would like to request that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we can have, if we have a motion from the committee to draft a letter, that's one thing we can do. I don't think we can do much about the BLM. Or we can have involvement by the Wyoming Fish and Game, but not the U.S. Wildlife. And
No, it is a letter to encourage them so that they can take it to their bosses and get a collective letter signed by whoever their bosses are. Obviously, John's going to have to get the director of the Game and Fish, probably the governor to sign it. But I think we should be working along that end as well. The resolution's one thing, but I think the letter's what I requested.
okay, we could, if we get a motion from the committee to draft a letter from this committee, we can do that. We can't direct the BLM or the U.S. Wildlife Service or the BIA.
I guess I'm making the
to do it.
motion then,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
We have a.
I
all
make
right,
the
we have a
motion
second.
that we send a letter out supporting these individuals that have all said they are willing to pursue that,
All
but they
right.
need something from us to help them with their bosses.
Okay,
Thank
we have a motion to draft a letter. John, well, it's been seconded. Discussion, we've discussed it pretty well. You've got more? Oh, good.
I
Okay,
haven't had a chance to get a word in edgewise, Mr.
okay,
Chairman.
go ahead, John.
Well, the day anyone thinks that the federal government at any level listens to us is probably a day we have to wake up from a dream. I think that we're a citizen legislative body, and we need to take care of this ourselves. And, you know, that maybe would be a Wyoming-based sterilization program on private lands and state lands. I think sending a letter is just going to go in the garbage can. And I understand the frustration over the person who brought this idea forward, Representative Worf. But I just think we're a lot better off just taking this to do it ourselves and come up with something real that we can do, because I don't have any faith in anyone else but us. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Any other discussion? Okay, okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
For many years, we in the legislature have not said anything. And so by the fact of our silence, then Congress thinks that act is working. So I think that we do need to actually say something. And I agree with how much impact resolutions or letters have. I agree that most of the time they're probably not listened to, but this is a situation where I think we've been silent for too long and that we do need to say something, and something needs to be said now.
Okay, ready to vote? Question being called. All those in favor of drafting a letter? I'm not just sure what we'll say in it. I'll help with that, though. Say aye. Aye. Opposed? I think it passed. I would say it passed. So we'll draft a letter and we'll work with you on that, Heather. So I think we're ready to adjourn for the day. Okay, motion. We are adjourned.